Welcome to the Jamal Thomas Morning Show. My name is Jamal Thomas. I am glad that you guys can join me this morning. It is an early Wednesday morning. Today is December 18th, if I'm getting my date correct. Yes, on the 18th. Look, guys, thank you for joining me this morning. We have a damn good show for you today, just like we have had all week, and we're going to keep that train ticking. If you guys dig this content, please give it a like. I know that's presumptive of me to say so, but it is a damn good show. And we have some really good guests today and some really good topics. So if you dig this content, give it a like, share it, subscribe to it. I'm trying to reach 40K by the end of the year. And with your help, damn it, we can do it. On top of that, hit the notification bell. I pop in at all times of the day and night because, that's what newsmen do. This is what we do. We were having this conversation one day. I think it was Malik. We were going to send him, or the company was going to send him to Europe to cover some event. And, in doing those events, there have been times where I have had to be up at like 4 in order to do the show, or even earlier, like let's say like 3 in the morning, then have to be up to cover the event all the way up till like 10 o'clock, and then wake up at 3 in the morning again and do it. And when we were talking to it, I was like, okay, well, he doesn't have to do that. And my boss was like, this is what we do. This is what we do. This is how we cover the news. So there are a few stories that are popping off that are super fascinating. So the Russian general that was assassinated, I mean, you can't even call it assassination, it's basically a murder. Not affiliated with the war zone, not planning war, fighting, or anything like that. He was a general dealing with chemical weapons, and they murdered him with a bomb, killing him and apparently an aide of his. Now, Moscow has vowed retaliation for this killing, but that's the rub. I mean, at a certain point, what do you do? I mean, truth be told, it seems that the Ukrainian military is at once bragging about it while simultaneously trying to imply that, well, these are just disaffected Russians that are doing this. Okay, well, you can't have it both ways. I don't know if anybody believes that. I think everybody and their mama at this point knows that this was Ukraine that was responsible for this. And so the catch becomes, okay, well, what do you do about it? Because you're stuck trying to walk a tightrope. Ukraine, at this very moment, is doing any and everything in its power to get the world into a third world war. You must understand, from their point of view, it's existential for Ukraine anyway. And the only chance that they have of doing anything in this contest, in this test of strength, is to get the West involved directly into the conflict in regards to either getting troops on the ground or somehow getting some kind of military assets involved from Western countries. And I don't mean that in the sense of giving a missile here and having Ukraine fire it. I mean, Ukraine requires a larger commitment and a larger intrusion into this war by Western powers for them to have any chance at all. So all of these things are radically provocative because that's what they're trying to do. They want an overreaction. They want to push Russia to do something that, at the very least, could create some kind of justification to get further ensconced in the conflict. And again, they're also doing this under a Biden when, from their point of view, Donald Trump will most likely try to push them into some kind of agreement where they're going to have to give up territory in order to end the war. Now, I know that Biden knows this. I would imagine Ukraine knows this. And I would imagine Russia knows this. So Russia's stuck trying to thread a needle. A, we need to respond because we need to stop this level of provocation. It is unacceptable for all intents and purposes, just murder. On the other side, the response can't be an overreaction. Like, I hope you get what I mean. It's a tightrope. I mean, personally, I know a lot of people at this point feel like there needs to be an overwhelming reaction, that the Oreshnik didn't do the job of creating this warning, creating this thought of stop this escalation now. And there are a few reasons for that. Part of it has to do with the fact that Ukraine is not necessarily in charge of Ukraine. If I if I if I have military assets on the ground that I am completely disconnected to, meaning I don't care about the men, I don't necessarily care about the country, I care about how I look in all of this. But for all intents and purposes, if these people die, get killed, if you lower the draft age, that doesn't exactly overtly affect me, especially in the context of what I'm trying to accomplish. Because, as I point out, what you're trying to do usually takes precedence over everything else. Well, if you hit the US, the entire reason, the entire point of this is to stick it to the Russians. Yeah, you may want to try to drag Ukraine into NATO, or for that matter, even Georgia into NATO, because you want that pivot point, that platform on which to attack that's on the border of Russia. And as I pointed out before, the incursions into Russia often, usually, it's very least from the last few wars, went through Ukraine. So if you're the US, you're aware of this. You want Ukraine to be that pivot point, meaning you want Russia to either accept it or to get dragged into some kind of conflict. Okay, you got them dragged into a conflict. But the problem for Ukraine is that the US doesn't have Ukraine's interests. I can't even say best interests. I mean, just interests in general in mind, because for all intents and purposes, these aren't American troops. Send your people out there to die for our objective of sticking it to the Russians. Meaning, this is not a situation where a general or president is overtly concerned about its own citizens being killed or its own population going without fuel or freezing to death in the wintertime. This is a U.S. that is somewhat distant from the decisions to which are being made on the battlefield. So if you got all of these people, if you get 500,000 dead Ukrainians, they're not Americans. If you get Ukrainians not being able to heat the houses in the wintertime, they're not Americans. I mean, at the end of the day, all of this always goes back to they're not Americans, and our key objective is to stick it to the Russians. Ukraine does not have anybody who is looking out for Ukrainian interests, including the government that, all things being equal, you would think would be looking out for Ukrainian interests. No, for all intents and purposes, they're pushing U.S. policy in this situation. And part of the reason, or part of, to make that point clearer, if you remember, one of the arguments that was being made to the American population was A, these aren't Americans, and B, the money that's going to Ukraine is a small investment in comparison to what we want to do, which is kill the Russians. And C, the money that we're spending that's going to Ukraine for all intents and purposes coming back to us, because much of that money is going to buy weapon systems to replenish the weapons that we sent Ukraine. Notice in this conversation, Ukraine doesn't really factor into it, short of being a proxy, a tool to accomplish a particular objective. I'm saying that this has been the modus operandi going all the way through, and it remains so now. So if Russia goes with this overwhelming response, again, the US's point of view, they're not Ukrainians or they're not Americans. Meaning every answer that Russia comes up with, regardless of how punishing it is, regardless of how brutal it is, will ultimately come back from the standpoint of Americans. Well, those aren't Americans. It's cynical. It's deeply, deeply cynical. And yet, here we are. And I guess my point is, from the Ukrainian perspective, it's existential for them anyway. Ukraine has no idea what Ukraine is ultimately going to be at the end of this. And so, from their point of view, the only chance that they have, and it's not even a chance to win it, just the only chance to draw it, is to draw the West into the war, which, for all intents and purposes, may be the end of all things. But from the Ukrainian government, it is the end of all things anyway. So we will see how this evolves. Mark Sleboda is going to be on to talk about it this morning. I look forward to talking to Mark. There's a lot to go over, so I'm looking forward to having that conversation with Mark. One of the other issues that's also still bubbling up, drones. Still no idea where the drones are coming from, and we are not getting an honest assessment from the administration. So this is John Kirby. John Kirby, who came out once before saying these were civilian aircraft and that they hadn't been in unrestricted airspace. And as I showed article after article, at the time, there were two incursions into military airspace, including Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. I even played the clip of the pilots talking about drones being on in the airspace, which was effectively shutting down the airspace for that same airbase. Kirby is asked about this once again because, again, Kirby got it so wrong last time. They were like, dude, are you still sticking with that story about these being, no military airspaces, that these are human driven craft, as opposed to quote unquote drones that everyone is saying that they were to people who were on the ground? This is Kirby.
As we look at the information we've got, Brett, and we've now examined some 5,000 different sightings, we've added detection capabilities, additional observers. As you and I stand here today, to date, our assessment is that this is lawful, legal, commercial, hobbyist, and even law enforcement aircraft activity. Some of it's manned, some of it's unmanned. We absolutely acknowledge that a lot of these are probably drones, but they're flying legally, and it is legal to fly drones in non-restricted airspace as long as you're registered with the FAA. And there's thousands and thousands of these kinds of flights every single day. I think there's more than 1 million drones that are registered with the FAA.
Therein lies the rub. Therein lies the rub. These things have been taking place in military airfields. It's not just civilian areas. But I want to bring in my guests. We are joined with the one and only Mark Sleboda, international relations and security analyst, and easily one of my favorite people to talk to. How you doing, Mark? You doing all right?
Tomorrow, thanks for having me. It's always an honor and a pleasure to be on the show.
No, man, it's always an honor and a pleasure to have you. Mark, I guess we have to start with the Russian general being murdered. I can't even call it. Wait a minute, one second. I can't even call it a killing or an assassination. It's just murder. I mean, this General Kirillov wasn't part of the battlefield, from my understanding. He wasn't even part of the military in the sense of like active operations. He was in the chemical weapons. What is going on with this? What is the latest on this story? And for that matter, why do you think he was killed? Was it just killing somebody to kill somebody because he wasn't the most, let's say, guarded? Give me your take on this. What's going on?
Yeah, okay. So there was, I would call it an assassination. I would call it an assassination that occurred with terrorist methods because it was a bombing that was conducted in a civilian area. If this had been the United States, well, then it would be a U.S. general, no matter who the U.S. was at war with or in conflict with or intervening in, right? It would certainly be called a terrorist act, right? When for instance, attacks were made on U.S. warships, that was also called a terrorist act. So I would feel justified because of the methodology that was used, right? A bombing, improvised explosive device, something around 300 grams of TNT hidden evidently in the handle of a scooter that was placed along the outside, the entrance of this Lieutenant General Igor Kirillov's apartment building. And unfortunately, as someone less than pleased about it, I would say that that actually the way scooters are ubiquitous in Moscow now, right? Not just among youth and teenagers, but couriers and everything else. Unfortunately, that is one of the things that unless there is really tight security over him, would probably has the possibility of escaping notice. So the person who arranged everything on the ground for the attack. An Uzbek citizen whom was caught. He came to Moscow specifically for this. He has made confessions already that he did this on orders from Ukrainian intelligence. And I mean, you could of course argue, oh, if he's in Russian custody, then we can't take anything he says for granted, except that CNN and The Independent and BBC and a whole host of Western and Ukrainian newspapers from their own sources, anonymous sources within the Ukrainian, the Kiev regime's intelligence services, have said that the SBU claims credit for it. Not officially, but unofficially through anonymous. They're playing that coy game, right? Because of potential diplomatic and legal implications, they're not going to come right out and say, yeah, we assassinated a Russian general, but they're going to come out and say it. They're going to brag about it unofficially, right? And we've seen this, pattern several times before. Now, the Kiev regime has a whole host of assassinations using bombings and killings under their belt. Just last week, a top Russian missile expert, Mikhail Shatsky, was gunned down in a park in Moscow. And we've seen previous attacks on high-ranking Russian military officers, not as high as Kirillov. He's certainly the highest so far, but we've seen it. And then we've seen the terrorist bombings of the civilians, the journalist philosopher Daria Dugina, the former East Ukrainian war correspondent and blogger Vladen Tatarsky, who was also killed in a bombing. And if you're talking East Ukrainian or self-identifying as former East Ukrainian, politicians, officials, activists, there have literally been hundreds of such assassinations, with bombings and shootings in the last 10 years that continue right up to this very day. Hundreds. And we've already heard a statement from the U.S. We have no comment. We knew nothing. We saw nothing. Right? If you want to believe that the U.S. doesn't know what the Kiev regime's intelligence services is up to. Yet, amazingly enough, wasn't it just last year that we had an article in the New York Times where they bragged that U.S. intelligence came in and rebuilt Ukrainian intelligence from the ground up in their own image. They were quite proud about that. They were bragging about it. So now suddenly they don't, they don't know what the Ukrainian military is doing when it does something that is, shall we say, that you don't openly want to claim credit for. Now, he was a general, and there is a conflict going on, but there is, as well as international, rules of war, laws of war under the Geneva Convention, there are also norms of war, right? And bombings targeting military and political leaders is not something that any country, well, I have to say that there's actually been a lot of European officials that have openly, endorsed the killing. So, but generally, sane political leaders in the U.S., they just, no comment. We have nothing to say. We didn't like the guy, but, we'll refer you to the Ukrainians. That was literally the statements that we heard from Count Smirkula. Mark Bellick. So it's the reason why the Kiev regime doesn't openly proclaim this is because of these norms of war, and the fear of such a path leads to a type of total war of annihilation that could be used against you, right? What is stopping this? The only thing stopping Russia from assassinating Ukrainian political and military leaders, as has been done to numerous Russians, is a restraint and a adherence to the norms of war and the laws of war, which, while I would never claim that they were 100%, this is a high intensity conflict. It is very heated, and crimes occur on both sides. Just that on one side they're a lot more open and a lot more egregious, but there is an attempt to adhere to the laws and norms of war on the Russian side, to fight an honorable war. And partly because of that, I mean, part of the reason for that, why doesn't Russia wipe out the Kiev regime leadership? You hear this again and again by people in comments and everything. And I have to admit, I feel a knee-jerk reaction myself, right? I feel, I want to strike back. I want vengeance. I want a tit for tat, a quid pro quo. But luckily, I'm not the Russian president. He's a lot more pragmatic and cold-blooded and calculating than I am. But part of the reason why Russia is trying its best to fight the good war is for diplomatic reasons, right? The reason, or certainly probably the single most important reason, that the Russia has survived the existential economic war of sanctions that the West has been waging on it, and managed to grow. The economy is still growing, at a healthy clip, despite all of this, is because the rest of the world outside the West refused to stop trading with Russia. They refused to, participate in the West's existential economic war of sanctions, even when, the U.S. makes the comment, you're either with us or against us, right? That hasn't worked. And so that is certainly, I think, a big part of the rationale within the Russian government, that we need to fight the good war to keep the rest of the world on our side. We are winning the way it is right now. So there is a constant fear that a breaking of the perception, at least by the rest of the world outside the West, right? They don't, the Western mainstream media propaganda is an entirely a different story, right? But the rest of the world can see what is going on and take a look at, I don't know, say what Israel is doing in Palestine or what the US did in Iraq. And, Russia seems to be trying to do their best to show restraint, right? To follow norms of war that have not been followed in other such instances. So that I think that's a big part of the rationale. As to the question of why Kirillov, why now? First of all, there's actually comments from people close to him that he had received, that he was afraid that he had received some type of word that he was now being hunted. So he may have even known or had some type of fear that this was coming. You're absolutely right. He has no direct. He's not planning or commanding troops in anything to do with the special military operation on the battlefield. The only thing that he has been doing in that regard is he was the head of Russia's CBRN, chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear defense forces. And as part of that job, he was documenting all of the Kiev regime's uses of chemical weapons, the Pentagon's funding of these bio research laboratories, that Russia has recovered, well, at least one, probably more from, that we saw, documentation presented, and maybe simply, cataloging these crimes. Now, the Kiev regime has had, when it comes to chemical weapons, the Kiev regime has what I would call as small scale use of chemical weapons, mostly local, nothing large and systemic. And most of the chemical weapons that have been used have been irritants, agents that that might be equivalent in certain crowd control situations in certain countries, but whose use is forbidden in war, right? There may have been a few isolated instances of something small, but even then, this isn't large scale or systemic. It's more scattered and perhaps at a local level, but it has definitely been present. Now, the Kiev regime suddenly, just in the 24 hours before the targeted assassination of Kirillov, they suddenly accused him of war crimes, right? This type of projection that the Kiev regime does, that Russia was using chemical weapons, of which there is no credible evidence whatsoever. Right? Let's be frank. This is pure projection. And so that justifies, they declared, therefore, he was a legitimate target. But the fact that he was removed from the SMO, the methodology that was used in killing him, one of his aides, one of his assistants was also killed in the explosion. And evidently his driver, who was waiting in the car right there, he was injured but survived despite damage to the car. So obviously, Russia, the Russian military leadership and the Russian political leadership are incensed about this, right? Because this is reaching out with another bombing in Moscow, right? Now, again, obviously, the intention of this is terror. Right, to make people fear, also perhaps to create tensions between the political and military leadership, because if the Russian government does not, and to be fair, they probably won't respond half-cocked, and they will not do it, almost certainly an over response to this, as they have, done to other things. Maybe part of the hope is that, the Russian generals will be, pissed off at Putin for not, taking action when one of their own and a high-ranking one. And he was really high-ranking. I mean, he was also a deputy to the Russian Security Council. I mean, he regularly reported to them. So very, very high level general, very well regarded in Russia for what he did, which was, defense forces against chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear attacks. And his documentation of the crimes of the Kiev regime and what the nefarious things that the U.S. was up to on Ukrainian soil, with biological research labs and other things is regarded as of an extremely high caliber of documentation. But I think you're also right that because he was not an active general in the SMO, the security around him may not have been as tight as it was around other people. And maybe they, through some surveillance of him and his routines and such, determined that he was a relatively easy target in that regard, a high-ranking, relatively easy target that would accomplish this. And part of the is also provocation, right? Again, everything is to provoke Russia into a response, because they're not getting any results on the battlefield, right? Obviously, Russia goes from progress to victory to progress, continually at this point. For over a year, we're going on well over a year of essentially ceaseless Russian offensive.
Right.
So there's a need to change the information warfare. Always, the Kiev regime is very conscious of the information war, and this dominates the headlines. You're not worried about the fall of Karakhova. You're not, talking about Russian further progress, kicking out their Kursk incursion, or that Pokrovsk is itself literally coming under siege now.
Right.
You're not talking about that. You're talking about an assassination of a military leader who was not in any way directly involved in the special military operation. But I have to say, again, this is not the first one. We've seen multiple ones. There was another assassination that got less coverage just last week. And you can expect a lot more such dirty tricks, right? Such, the U.S. might call it, military might call it unconventional warfare. You will see a lot more of this as the end. I don't like using the word end game, right? Because we can't make that. But the situation is getting worse and worse and worse for the Kiev regime. They're getting more and more desperate. And as that desperation increases, they will increasingly turn to such methods. And eventually, at some point, and I don't want to make any predictions about how long. I'm not optimistic that the war will be ended quickly. But, at some point, the overt war military war will end, but guerrilla war will almost certainly continue, and then it will be entirely things of such regard. So it's really something Russian government is just going to have to endure, at least until they remove the regime in Kiev, perhaps go further all the way to the Polish border, and even then, it may not entirely go away. Unfortunately, that's the reality of the conflict. Unfortunately.
That's the rub with this, though. They have to do something. Because I guess my sense is you can't keep saying, we're going to retaliate, we're going to retaliate, we're going to retaliate. And again, I agree with you. You're right. It is an assassination. He is, at the very least, part of the military in the sense of, working with them as opposed to just rando person being killed. But I get the sense that Russia has to do something. The reality of it is, can they really afford to allow this type of killing without a legitimate response, whatever that legitimate response is?
They have many times before, unfortunately. That's the reality. Many of these killings go completely under the radar, right? When it's East Ukrainian officials, or former East Ukrainian, when it's officials and activists and leaders in the Donbass, in Zaporozhye, in Kherson, this happens all the time. It's happened hundreds of times. And it's not even newsworthy. It happens so much, certainly not in the Western media. Now, simply because he was the highest ranking and profile, there will be a show of a response. And certainly Medvedev has the new Zhirinovsky Medvedev, Medvedev 2.0, if you want to call him, who has become this, fire-breathing patriot. He has, said, I think correctly, but using, rather evocative language, that this is the agony of the Banderite regime, right? And in that sense, he's actually right. It's because they're dying, that they're, that slowly maybe, but they're going through this desperation measures as they look for a way outside of, the kill box. And he also, however, promised, that to destroy the political military leadership of the Kiev regime. He also made statements to that effect. Now, he's also made lots of comments before about attacks on decision-making centers and everything that haven't always panned out, shall we say. He's a lot of bluster and rhetoric coming from Medvedev. So while I would suspect, right, and I would be happy to be proved wrong on this, but I suspect that there will be a response, that they will announce some missile strikes that are going to target some intelligence facilities, something of that regard. Right. And we will never really know how effective such strikes were. My understanding is that there have been previous strikes on the Kiev regime's SBU, their main intelligence directorate, that has claimed responsibility from this. And there have been strikes on the Kiev regime's military intelligence, the GUR, that has openly also admitted being involved in such type of assassinations before, but yet their work continues. Why? Because they're scattered, in underground facilities and the like. Supposedly, this was at least radioed in from Dnipropetrovsk. So maybe a strike on a Ukrainian a Kiev regime intelligence facility in Dnipropetrovsk. But I wouldn't expect anything more than that. Certainly, we're not going to see tit for tat. We're not going to see, assassinations, targeted killings, bombings in response. You're not going to see any attempted assassination of Zelensky, which, I know that there's propaganda in the Kiev regime regurgitated by the West, but, very early in this conflict, it was made clear even to the Israeli prime minister at the time, Naftali Bennett, that there would be no attempt to kill Zelensky. I don't believe that has ever changed, largely because, Russia doesn't really regard him as a very effective leader, either diplomatic or politically or military. And there's always the case that anyone who replaces him might be more formidable. So why? So I think there's part of that logic there. You're not going to see Russia carpet bombing Kiev or something of the sort. It will be a very calculated response. And unfortunately, the reality is that, unless they manage to get the head of the SBU or, something which seems unlikely to me, at least in the short term, then we will never really know how effective such response will be. But you're not going to see a half-cocked, mass response. With the last attack, right? Remember, Russia has made comments about the US's and the British attacks of deep inside Russia with missiles, with ATACMS or Storm Shadows and Scalps, with the fig leaf of a proxy Kiev regime somewhere in the vicinity when the US is firing those weapons. And just again, there was 6 attacks made in towards Taganrog in South Russia. And what was Russia's response? Nothing. They made a very large missile and drone attack that was almost certainly scheduled to occur against the Kiev regime's electrical and military industrial complex anyway, that would have had to be prepared weeks in advance. And they simply said, this is our response, right? And anyone who's paying attention knows that that's almost certainly not the situation, that they simply claim that. Why? Because the attack was so ineffective, they didn't even feel the need to respond. And because they don't want to escalate when they know that Trump has been, is going to take office, and whatever else he may or may not do in terms of de-escalation, he has outright said that he's against these missile attacks deep inside Russia, that he thinks it is stupid. I would say more suicidal and a death, a Götterdämmerung death wish, rather than necessarily stupid. But that's Trump's way with language, I guess. So Russia is winning. They're not going to take their eye off the ball. I mean, you've seen Star Wars: The New Hope, right?
Of course.
Yeah. Stay on target, right? I mean, that's lame. They're not going to respond to provocations, like say I would in the heat of the moment. Putin is
not the most satisfying. I'll put it that way.
No,
and
it's not.
That was kind of the issue, right? Because from my point of view, it allows provocation without response. Continuous provocation without response, especially if it's in this kind of logic of what Trump is coming in, so we don't necessarily want to do anything, and so we're going to give Ukraine a free hand to do whatever it wants because we want to wait for Trump to come in. That is a pathway to escalation, at least from my point of view.
Absolutely. And I've made the argument myself that if you don't respond, then that only encourages more escalation, right?
Yes.
I've made that. And they have certainly had that argument in the Kremlin. You can be sure that this has been discussed and argued, and ultimately I think what they've come down on is that the ultimate revenge is winning. We're not going to do anything that is going to escalate and potentially change that situation. All of this is infuriating pinpricks, right? Poking the bear. But ultimately, does it change the fact that Russia is winning and winning decisively on the battlefield, and that the Kiev regime and that, NATO, the US, NATO has no hope of altering that outcome? No, it doesn't. So that is cold-blooded. It is pragmatic, right? It is, very calculating to a degree that's Putin, right? I mean, that's what he is. And again, I myself have a very visceral response to these things, right?
Yeah.
Being an immigrant to Russia, feeling, very patriotic, having family, in Crimea and former and still some parts of Eastern Ukraine. I feel a gut reaction for, payback. Maybe that's the inner American in me screaming. Although lots of Russians have been screaming, Russian animals have been screaming. But ultimately, it's hard to argue with results. And you can make the claim, oh, Russia hasn't achieved anything. Russia is fighting all of NATO at this point. They're fighting the US. They've demilitarized NATO's military stocks. Right. I mean, they're down to monthly production. That's all that they can support the Kiev regime with on so much that is needed for this type of war. And
no, I agree with you. I do agree with you. I mean,
it's not satisfying. I agree with you. It's not satisfying to me either.
And it is practical.
But
yeah, I get it.
It is pragmatic and practical. And also part of that calculation is Russia, saying, well, what can they do next to escalate? What infuriation will they do? Yet, someone has thought all of this out, and they've said, yeah, we can take that too. We can take it and keep going. And that is, exactly that argument, right? That we just had, that this will, if they don't respond, this will only encourage more. And yes, they've thought through that, I almost certainly assure you, and decided that they can take the next provocation too.
Well, speaking of the battlefield, Petrovsk, what is taking place on the battlefield currently? I want to go to the side for a bit, but I do want to nail down what's currently taking place on the battlefield in Kursk, for example, and in Petrovsk.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's been in the South, there's a whole bunch of things going on. We used to talk about these 3 Kiev regime supply and logistics centers behind the lines, right, in the Ocheretna direction, once the Kiev regime Russia had broken through the Kiev regime defenses at Avdiivka, right? Then we had the Ocheretna bloom, and then we started talking that there's these 3 supply centers back there. It was Pokrovsk, Karakhova, and Selidovo. And Selidovo is already firmly in Russian hands. In Karakhova, it's really just cleanup operations at this point. There's been hundreds of Kiev regime forces that are caught in a cauldron that south of Karakhova that they can't get troops out of. Karakhova is essentially facing the same thing. The last supply road into the city is already under heavy artillery and drone control, and there's really only a small section of the city still in Kiev regime hands. Karakhova, for all intents and purposes, is over. It's just the mopping up. And already the siege of Pokrovsk has begun, right? Russian forces are just a few kilometers outside. In fact, if you're counting suburbs, then it's already begun. And again, Russia is going to move on the city from multiple directions, right? We're not talking a full encirclement, almost certainly, but they're going to take it into pinchers. They're going to put the supply lines under a great deal of a pressure, right? First artillery and drone control, and then they'll cut them off one by one as much as they can, right? And at the same time, they will begin moving from probably from the east, from the north and the south in at the same time, right? As they've done in multiple, it's been proven very effective. And from what I've seen in the past 2 weeks, what defenses have been erected, at least in the outskirts of Pokrovsk, have not been formidable at all. So Russia has been able to move pretty steadily in that regard. And the implications, first of all, is because that this is a transport hub and logistics center, taking it away from the Kiev regime and putting it in Russian hands will cripple their logistics, supporting their last major holdouts, last major defensive line in the Donbass region, and will improve Russia's ability to project power in that direction. But also, if you go directly west of Pokrovsk, it's nothing, right? You're going directly into the Dnipropetrovsk region. Russian forces are, in some cases, around 10 kilometers or even less from the Dnipropetrovsk region at this point. And there's no significant urban centers, right, that are defendable. There's no fortifications. There's no topographical or geographic boundaries, right? It's steppe. From Pokrovsk, undefended steppe for the most part, just very small settlements, all the way to Pavlograd on the banks of the Dnieper River and Dnipropetrovsk itself. So that is huge operational space, right? And well behind the Kiev regime's line. So there's every possibility that when Trump takes office on January 20th, not that Russia sets artificial political deadlines, timelines like that, but that Russian forces could be in a new region that they have not yet been in before. And again, this will cripple the Kiev regime's abilities to sustain operations in the Donbass region if Pokrovsk is gone as well. And that will also, we've got two other big settlements right now, Toretsk and Chasiv Yar, and they're down to a couple of streets and buildings apiece at this point, right? Both of those hard fought over urban agglomerations and fortified areas are, just hanging by a thread at this point. So you could very well see a lot of things being announced in very short order, right? Karahava is officially taken. Toretsk is officially taken. Chasiv Yar is officially taken. And they're also moving in the north on Seversk and Kupiansk as well. So Russia is, again, they're not just attacking in one place. They're attacking along the entire front line. And the other thing that I would mention is expect to see another suicidal Kiev regime offensive.
Really?
Over the winter months. Absolutely. Syrskyi has outright said it, right? He's openly said it. There appears to be buildups in several areas. Again, they're probably thinking Trump taking into office and Trump will force a ceasefire and we need to take, to show that we're still fighting. And if we take something real quick, we can then trade it back when Trump forces negotiations, which are not going to happen, at least not on Trump's terms anyway. But so I would say that there's several areas of the front line where it is possible that the Kiev regime could launch an offensive. And must be said, they've received hundreds of U.S. strikers, right? Armored vehicles that we have not seen yet on the battlefield again, right? Since the you just said, Australia sent 50 older Abrams tanks, right? Germany also sent hundreds. This is a offensive force, right? Probably nothing near as big as 2023 summer offensive, but it is, obviously an offensive force that is being built up in reserve. They're having problems with it. Supposedly, a French-trained brigade, 1,000 troops, just deserted from it after their training. Because the desertion is such a big problem. People don't want to fight and die for this regime, but still they're going to try. So the first place is Bryansk in the north, right? We had the strikes in Belgorod and then the strikes, the incursion in Kursk, and Bryansk is just to the west of that. It's the last area in the north of Ukraine there. The furthermost western Russian region. And there's a big buildup of forces there on the Kiev regime side. Russian airstrikes and artillery have been very active behind the lines there. And there's even been a few Russian DRG incursions into that area, which means they're almost certainly looking to see what's coming. Now, there's several other possible areas where they could launch an offensive, and almost certainly some of these are meant to, obfuscate, say, and one of them will be real at least. So it could be another attempt to strike into the Belgorod region. Again, Belgorod, Kursk, Bryansk, Kursk, Belgorod, right? So to go back in the Belgorod region, where the neo-Nazis made attacks, earlier in the spring and last as well. There could also be attempts to cross the former Kakhovka Reservoir in the south, in the Zaporozhye region, to make another attempt to retake the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant. Again, part of the concern there is that the electricity shortfall that the Kiev regime is experiencing, plus, God knows what kind of nuclear false flag they could arrange getting their hands on a nuclear plant, so forth. And another maybe outside possibility is something in Moldova, the neighboring post-Soviet country with a pro-separatist Russian region, and a current pro-Western, vehemently pro-Western government, a small country, but that is extremely politically divided. And it must be said that in that separatist pro-Russian region, Transnistria, there is one of the largest Soviet arms depots. A huge amount of the weapons that were withdrawn from the former Warsaw Pact countries are in that arms depot. That is enough arms and ammunition for that the Kiev regime is very familiar with and doesn't need training on, and knows how to use, even if it's not all in the best of condition. That could sustain them for, I don't know, a year or two if they manage to get their hands on it. I would assume that it's probably rigged to blow, expecting that. But anyway, it would be very hard for Russia to reinforce troops in that area, because it's on the other side of the Odessa region of Ukraine, and it doesn't have any type of sea access. So that would be a horizontal escalation, taking the war outside of just Ukraine again. And of course, there are questions about the wisdom of such an act, and could that justify NATO direct intervention, and so forth and so on. But those are the four potentials. And almost certainly one of them is going to happen sometime later this winter, when the ground is nice and frozen.
Let me ask you this. Assad's letter, what did you make of it? I'm curious.
Kind of lame, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah. Is it fair to say that the Russian point of... Oh, no, please finish.
No, go ahead. The Russian point of view?
I was going to say, is it fair to say the Russian point of view has a certain amount of derision associated with Assad, even if they're saying, yes, we're going to stick by our allies, we're sticking by our friends, etc. There seems to be a bit of derision directed in his way. But correct me if I'm wrong on this.
No. I mean, I can't tell you what the Kremlin thinks. I can't tell you what the discussions of Putin or the Russian National Security Council, but it's quite obvious that from videos we've seen, the Russian troops in Syria had nothing but contempt for a Syrian Arab army that ultimately obviously responded to subversion and co-option and took bribes or blackmail or threats or whatever, and just stood down. They ordered their troops to go home, not to fight, right? Lots of contempt for that by Russian soldiers who were themselves ready to continue the fight, right. In Syria. this nonsense. There's some kind of 5D Russian chess, and that Russia was willing to sacrifice the entire nation of Syrian ethnic minorities, all right, to jihadists because of some type of trap to lure NATO into. That's just no evidence. I mean, Russia was very upset about what happened, and while they expected and were already doing airstrikes for over a month into Idlib, a jihadi offensive, what they almost certainly did not expect was the amount of infiltration and subversion of the Syrian army, and that they would just give up the fight. And that has, of course, extended to, I think, to Assad, to a very large degree. He did nothing, apparently, nothing publicly anyway, to speak to the Syrian people or rally the Syrian troops. There was silence, coming out of Damascus, on his regard, at least. Everything was falling apart, and he was apparently little more than an observer. And then he, retreated first to the Russian base in Hmaimim, and then eventually, although he says it was a little bit later than the presumed timeline, but there's a feeling that he simply wasn't strong enough, that he wasn't charismatic enough, that maybe, while he held for that decade between 2011 and 2019 of the active conflict, that he lost the frozen conflict, and perhaps, there's openly questions, and I think they're at least partially legitimate. I place the ultimate blame on Turkey and the Syrian Arab Army generals and officers who agreed to stand down, but I also don't think that there's, a question that Assad simply wasn't strong enough to keep the country together under the immiserating effects of U.S. sanctions and the illegal military occupation of Syria's natural resources, their oil and wheat, the rotting out of the Syrian state and military that has obviously occurred in the last 5 years. So I can't speak for the Kremlin, but simply when we're talking what's being said in the Russian press and the videos we've heard from Russian military on the ground in Syria, there is a lack of respect and no small amount of contempt to go around either.
Yeah, that was my take also. I saw, I think it was the foreign minister, or no, it was an ambassador or something to that effect when this first took place. And I think they call them cowardly. I mean, they didn't hold back in regards to their contempt. And I saw the videos of the Russian troops that was watching this kind of caravan of men just dropping their weapons and leaving. Yeah, so it did seem
that was extremely foul Russian language. That was mocked. Russia has entire dictionaries of cursing. It is an art form to be able, and my wife has never allowed me to learn proper Russian mod, by the way. It is so much stronger than American cursing. Like it is a literal, it's becoming less of a taboo than it once was, I guess, modern culture, post 91 and everything, but still there's a strength and a stigma to it that doesn't happen with American cursing, which is really, what, you got 7 words? I mean, that's right. Just put together in different patterns and everything. It's that appear in practically every Hollywood movie anyway. So yeah, it's definitely not the same thing. So there was a great deal of creative mott on Syrian, deserters or sellouts or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, we have about 30 seconds, but I would imagine from the Russian point of view, we gave our lives, we gave our money.
A lot of political capital and treasure. Yeah.
Yeah, and when it came down to it, called it quits. Mark, man, thank you. Well, I always appreciate these conversations, Mark. You always give me some kind of context to put this stuff in, especially since you're there, you're on the ground, and you've been paying attention to it. And I've always appreciated your intake on this stuff. So thank you for this.
And I always enjoy our conversations. So
excellent. Mark Sleboda,
International Admire your hat.
Thank you. I'm thinking of getting a hat. What does they call those things? A collaboration, a hat collaboration with somebody. It's like I wear them all the time. But Mark Sleboda, International Relations and Security Analyst. You can follow Mark on Twitter at Mark Sleboda1. You can find him on his YouTube channel at Real Politics with Mark Sleboda. And of course, on Facebook.com/Gramsci. Definitely check his content out. If you wanted some kind of context on what is taking place. You have some of the best analysis that I've come across, Mark. Thank you for this.
Thanks for having me.
All right. I want to go to our next guest. We have another. Come on. There we are. We have another friend of the show, the one and only Ted Rall. Ted Rall is a political cartoonist, syndicated columnist, host or co-host with Vanilla Chan of the TMI morning show that comes on from 10 to 12 every day. Ted Rall. What's going on, Ted? How you doing this morning, man?
I'm doing pretty good, Jamal. It's good to be on your show.
It's good to have you.
It's hats are an important topic of conversation. I overheard, Mark talking about, and I was like, it's like, first of all, hats are increasingly going to be important because, particularly for those of us in the balding set, as the ozone layer goes away, right? You want to avoid skin cancer, so it's very practical to cover that. You need that headpiece to like keep from having those gross, like big cancers on your scalp.
Fortunately, I still have full head of hair.
Good.
But no, I just liked it. I think I was in Puerto Rico, and I ended up getting a Federo, and I think I've worn one ever since. I loved it. It's just like, oh, I like this. This works.
And if you try a lot of hats, right, it's interesting, right? Because there's just like, for each guy, there's like, there's a hat that's really better for you than others. And then there's other hats. There's certain hats you just can't really wear, right? It's like, like for some reason, I can do a Stetson. I can rock a Stetson. I don't know. It's the shape of my face or something. I don't know. But
it just works.
I've been trying. I want to bring back. I've been making all these jokes about like I want Trump to mandate that all men must wear the sombrero, the hat of dignity, just because I want everyone to be bumping into each other, like in the streets and in the subways, and just like like how does that hat even work? It's like such a great hat. It is a great hat.
A massive hat. I don't know how that works either. I don't. But people wear all sorts of stuff. So no, I feel you on that.
Yeah.
When I hit you up yesterday, you're saying you're still paying attention to the Luigi case, that you were fascinated by this case.
I'm obsessed with it. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Do they
I
know
read everything I can about it. I read all the comment sections that are like next to it. There's an op-ed in today's New York Times by a guy who used to be a PR flack for Cigna. I don't know if you saw it, and he's talking about how he got disgusted by his own work because he had to spin bullshit about like how they're doing their best, but really like some 17-year-old girl died under their watch because they refused like necessary surgery that might have saved her life, and so stuff like that. And I'm obsessed with it. It's fascinating on a lot of levels for me.
Are they certain that it's the same person? And I know certain. I mean, it's it's a case, right? But do they have more? Let me say, in that case. Because initially, from my understanding, they were like, okay, well, we think this is the person. But the information that they received from him, like whatever they did, the checks and everything else, like it seemed to be clear that this was the person that most likely was the killed Syria.
It looks like him. I mean, I had my doubts, but now, sort of like a lot of the information that's come out kind of explained away my doubts. Like, for example, I was like, who has two jackets, right? Well, apparently he did, because they found one of this in the backpack in Central Park, right? So things like that. I mean, I'm a little mad at him for making some dumb mistakes. I keep planning it like playing it out in my mind. Like, if that had been, I mean, there's some things he did really well. Like he like went all the way uptown to northern Harlem to make it look like he got out of town on the bus from the George Washington Bridge bus terminal. But then he took the subway all the way back down to Penn Station and then took the train out instead. I love that kind of thing. That's really smart. But then you're like, okay, so when the lady at the youth hostel, just like 2 blocks from where I live, goes like, hey, I need to see your face to see if it matches your ID. I'd be like, you know what? I don't need to stay here. I'm going to stay somewhere else. Bye. And why didn't he do that? I mean, literally, if he hadn't done that,
that's what caught him.
right now eating at McDonald's freely and relaxed, right? That's what did him in, was the cameras, the facial recognition software. That was it. And it's like that's sort of, and then there's just like so many other little mistakes that he made, and it kind of drives me crazy. Like he didn't get rid of the gun. He was eating out. Like I don't know. It's just it's weird. And also, if it had been me, he had those very distinctive eyebrows and everything.
Well, that too.
Shave your hair, shave the eyebrows, or trim them. Then later, let all that can grow back, and you'll look different. So it's just stuff like that. It's just like you made some dumb mistakes, man.
Are you fascinated by the level of ire that's been dumped on the CEO?
Yes, I'm fascinated by everything about this. So I'm fascinated, first of all, by the fact that there is so much, and I've always theorized this. Like, my ex-wife used to have the feeling that if she had a feeling, she was unique and no one else had it. I've always felt like if something bugs you in the world, the odds are a lot of other people feel the same way as you do. You're not unique, right? And so I think about things like there used to be, in the 70s and 80s, smoking in like hospitals and restaurants and grocery stores, airplanes. And no one said anything. You just basically put up with it. But nobody liked it, really, if you were a non-smoker. And then like when finally some politicians were like, we shouldn't do this anymore, everyone's like, yeah. So it means that there's all these pent-up opinions that are out there that are just not expressed because people feel like there's no point talking. Well, that's kind of like the US, right? There's certain political opinions, political and non-political opinions, that there's just no point expressing, right? Like I hate Thanksgiving. But no one wants to hear from me. I don't say anything about that at the time. There are times when, I just don't. Are you still there, Jamal? I'm just seeing myself.
No, I'm here. I just
cool.
gave you a solo.
Just wondering. All right. So yeah, whoa.
It's like, whoa, what's going on with this?
Yeah, you never know with
no, I'm here. I'm sorry.
With this tech stuff, what's going to happen. So anyway, and so there's all these things like that where it's sort of like, and then you realize, like, so for example, I've had both some major and some really minor indignities with healthcare, including United Healthcare. I used to have United Healthcare, minor indignities, right? I had skin tags in my armpits. They're not like horrible, but they're annoying because they itch and they bleed, and like there you are. Like I used to wear white shirts to work, and suddenly I have like blood going down my white shirt. That's not cool at work. So I go to my dermatologist to have them removed, and they go, "Oh yeah, United Healthcare turned that down." I'm like, what do you mean to turn it down? It's like a $200 thing. It's like, no, they said it's not necessary. It's just cosmetic. I'm like, it's not cosmetic. I mean, literally you're bleeding from your armpits. That's not normal. They said, and they actually recommended. United Healthcare recommended that I should take care of this myself by taking dental floss and tying them off. And I'm like, what's next?
What?
Like removing your teeth by like tying a string to a door and slamming the door like it's 1860? I mean, literally.
Wait. Just so I'm clear. The insurance company who provides health insurance, suggested, hey, you probably shouldn't use us for this. What you should go do is go get dental floss and work that out yourself.
Yeah, you take care of that yourself. I had warts on my hands. Okay, and they're like, again, dermatology thing. They're like, yeah, you can live with those warts. Now, you are looking, this is a whole different show. You're looking at a guy who was literally almost died from a wart. I had a wart on my chest. The root grew into an artery. I literally was in the ER for a week. I almost died. So I'm like, you're talking to the wrong guy when you say that warts don't need to be removed. I know it's rare, but it's like warts need to be removed, right? It's an alien life form in your skin. It's got to go. And it's like, so they're like, yeah, we don't cover that. That was United Healthcare. And that was 35 years ago before they started to really suck. So, and then like, I literally had to, 2 years ago, I had a hernia operation, get the pre-approval code. This was a Blue Cross Blue Shield thing, not United. It's all, I'm ready to go, right? I wait hours because it's during the pandemic. There's short staff. They wheel me into Gurney. I'm in my frock of no dignity with my butt hanging out. They bring me in under the big giant light where you're gonna this is the last light you're gonna see before you die. They're ready to put me out, and they're like, Mr. Rall, insurance company has revoked their pre-approval. I'm like, what does that mean? And they're like, well, you can go home, and I'm like thinking, so if you like your hernia, you can keep it, or you can, pay up front. I'm like, how much? And they're like, well, we're going to need a $4,000 deposit. And I'm like, now? Can we do this after? No, it's like, I'm afraid we're going to need this now. So I have to bring in the clipboard. I have to fish out. I'm like, well, my wallet's in, back in the prep room. You got to go fish out my Amex. So it's like, and okay, so I do have the ability. I have enough credit on my card to do this. But I'm like, and then ultimately they dunned me a total of $12,000. But I'm like, it's a hernia. Okay, you have to have it. You can die from an untreated hernia. So you got to do it. And so so it's like, and it's like sort of like, fuck these guys, right? So this is I'm just one guy. I'm relatively healthy. I mean, I've got to think, like I used to tell my ex-wife, everybody feels this way, but nobody talks about it because people think that there's no point. They think they're just stuck with their misery. This gave everybody permission to be like, yeah, fuck those guys.
It was an outlet.
So that's fascinating. It's also fascinating to see the disjunct between the establishment media, right, which has run dozens of op-eds basically saying, what does it say about our society that we're so callous that we don't care that a father of two boys, has been gunned down by a coward who shot him in the back? I'm like, what do you mean shot him in the back? What is this, the Old West? It wasn't a gunfight. It's like he assassinated him, okay? It's like it wasn't like, hey, Alexander Hamilton, turn around.
Yeah.
We're going to do this here. It's not like that.
He whacked him for
your dueling pistol. It's not like that. But it's like, and then it's like, and then I like how they personalize it, which I knew they would. They, well, what's it to him? He was privileged. He could easily afford from his rich family to pay for healthcare. And I'm thinking, well, you could argue that someone who is from a rich family and has sympathy and empathy for people who don't might be actually the best kind of person, right? As opposed to someone who's completely self-interested. But it's like, well, and then it's like, well, look at the back operation. Obviously, he was suffering from pain. He was psychotic from the pain meds. He lost his mind. And I'm like, you don't know any of these things. He
experienced
things up to try to basically make it look like he's insane. Now, here's the thing is, he might be insane. I have no idea. There's no evidence that he's insane. But let's say he is. Who cares? That doesn't mean he was wrong. I mean, and then there's the question I keep asking people. My grandfather walked up behind German soldiers in the streets of a French town and shot them in the back when they walked out of a bar drunk. He assassinated them. It's like he was a terrorist. He was also a hero of the French resistance. These were German soldiers. They were in France. They weren't supposed to be there. He's a war hero. What is the difference between killing an SS officer in World War II, who's responsible for countless death and misery, and killing a CEO who signs off on death and misery every single day? I'm not sure there is any difference.
From the standpoint of the way
you're not using Zyklon B does not mean you're not evil.
Well, I agree with you on the way that the media has been looking at this. It's been very strange. It's almost like they're saying, okay, we could potentially be whacked. And so we side with the CEO in this. Or it's this kind of virtue signal thing of, okay, this is pretty bad. We don't like vigilante justice. But again, I think what they're missing here is there is a valid question of what does it say about a society that allows thousands, hundreds of thousands to die because they don't have health insurance. And if you go somewhere like Canada,
with health insurance,
or with like,
I mean,
getting
thousands, it's a scam. They literally, what is health insurance? If you get sick, you won't be in trouble because you paid us, and we'll take care of you.
Exactly.
I mean, it's kind of like I saw a comparison. Well, what about Coors? They kill people with alcoholism, and someone responded, "No, this is more like Coors sells you a 6-pack, and there's no beer inside."
Right.
That's
right.
what this is like.
Right. Well, they find ways to be like, I know we said this was 12 ounces, but really we were able to get this down to 6. No, it's screwed up. Like in Canada, for example, they've started doing euthanasia. And you have a lot of people who chooses euthanasia because they can't afford health care, or they don't want to be a burden on their family, or they don't have the resources of state in order to assist in that way. And that's Canada. Canada has universal health care and those things. And yet it's still one of those things that pops up. No, I agree with you that they are looking at this. Look, I get it, right? It's an assassination. He killed somebody. And I also get the fact this guy had a family and everything else. But let's not, let's be very clear that this CEO and many of these CEOs of these health companies make profits by denying people health care. And I'm saying healthcare in the context of people at a miserable state in their life, meaning this is a moment where you actually need help. You need assistance. You're in pain. You're in a crisis. And the last thing you want to have to deal with is an insurance company saying, oh, by the way, we don't support this. Or, oh, by the way, we don't cover this. That is enraging. So I get the level of rage associated with being in pain, being in difficulty, and then having an insurance company that makes your life that much more miserable and that much more difficult for profits, just purely for their profits. And again, there was another point that you made the other day, a political solution. There is no political solution. There is no way around
within the system. Okay.
There is no way to work within the system on this. I mean, we had Sanders. Sanders gets cheated, meaning every avenue of trying to change this process is eliminated.
Even though it would be popular, right? Now, that's the thing that always drives me crazy. I think it's like, okay, let's just say, you and me and 6% of the population wants, Medicare for all. Okay, well, we're going to have to work harder. We're going to have to talk to our friends and neighbors and do more podcasts and try to get the word out, to try to convince people. This is not one of those issues. This is one of those issues that if there were a clearly worded national plebiscite that explained, like, what would, we are going to have the same, basically you'll still have the same doctors and hospitals and nurses that you have now, but this is going to be covered by the government. Copays are going to go away. Deductibles are going to go away. In-network is going to go away. Pre-authorization is going to go away. There's going to be no middleman. If your doctor says you need something, you're going to get it. That's it. Okay, I guarantee you that's going to pass overwhelmingly. And Democrats, Republicans, blue states, red states, independents, libertarians, communists, fascists, we're all voting for it. So that's the point. You can't really say that we're a democracy when you have the vast majority of people agree with something, but it has no outlet. It's not even allowed to be expressed. Like, I'm an op-ed writer. I'm a good op-ed writer. I'm in the Wall Street Journal. If I submit a piece basically defending Luigi Mangioni's actions to the New York Times op-ed page, to my editor at the Wall Street Journal, to my syndicate, I can do it to my syndicate, and I have. Okay, very few. I did last week. I ran something like that. The only papers of mine that ran, and they paid for it, that ran that piece were outside of the United States. In Hong Kong and in Japan and places like that. They're not going to run them. They will not run. So there's no legitimate outlet. You can only run these namby-pamby, like, well, I understand, like, you get all really angry about, like, not, like your daughter dying of leukemia, and that's sad, but, like, and like she could still be alive, but, it's like, but you can't kill a CEO on the street. And then there's the, I think rightfully so also, what's with the national manhunt for this guy, right? I mean, people are killed in New York City every day. It's like, and why do we care about him? And we know why they care about him. It's not because he's white and rich, although that's certainly a major contributing factor. It's also because, oh my God, this guy, like, he's like one of the higher ranking pieces on the chessboard. And if we start to lose, like, the bishop and the rook, that's a problem. They're going to come after the queen and the king at some point. That's what this is. This is about power and class. And he was one of theirs. He's a made man. The U.S. mafia family can't let a made man get whacked and let it pass. They can't. So this is gangster shit. And like and they, everyone just falls in line, and the media really exposes itself, and then that hilariously infuriates the American public more and makes it more likely that something like this will happen again. There will be a copycat because of that. Because there's no way to, there's no vent, right? There's no pressure release valve that says like, you guys have a point,
Yeah, there's no outlet. And like I said, there's no political solution to it. And you would think that with something like this and the fervor around it in a functional system, they would be like, hey, this seems like it's an issue. Not so much. Not so much. They don't touch it.
Nope.
Guess who's back? Guess who's back? Kamala Harris has made an appearance. Kamala Harris has made an appearance. And apparently this was one of her main speeches, or I got to be honest, I don't even know what this was in reference to. But she says something here that she seems very enamored by herself after she says it. And I want to get your take on this. She has a way with words. I'll put it that way. Let me put this back and let me cut this down because this thing is really loud. But Harris making her appearance.
All right.
The test of our commitment is whether, in the face of an obstacle, do we throw up our hands or do we roll up our sleeves? And as we approach, and I ask you to remember the context in which you exist. Yeah, I did that.
Well, now that she's not running in the race, she can unleash the laugh again. So that's back.
Oh my God.
You know what's funny about that? Putin made this point one day where he says something to the effect of, he says, she seems to be a very happy person. I mean, look at her laugh. How can you dislike somebody who laughs like that? Like, he's clearly ribbing her, right? He seemed very enamored with herself in that comment. The context to which you exist, and just waits, and it just laughs and laughs and laughs. That laugh had been restrained for the entire election cycle. Now she can unleash it with fury.
Laugh is loose.
Yeah, too funny.
I mean, that tape really reminds me of why she lost, right? I mean,
yeah.
And by the way, one of the rules of humor is you're not supposed to laugh at your own jokes. It is one of the important rules.
Not with that level of fervor, I
not
suppose.
That much.
Yeah, she was very enamored with herself on that one. I apparently they're talking about her running for governor of California.
She could probably get that in the same way that Hillary Clinton got senator from New York in 2000. I mean, it would be teed up for her. It's a one-party state. There's effectively no GOP. She could, if the party bosses decide to give that to her, I don't see her taking it though, because governor's a hard job. You gotta work. You gotta work really hard, and California is a very challenging state. It's not Delaware where you just have to look out for the PO boxes. it's like I don't know. I don't see it. Maybe. I mean, she
would have to eat through Newsom. That's something that Newsom doesn't run.
She'll end up as a college president or something like that. I really think she'll go the Pepperdine University route, like that kind of thing. I see that. I mean, that is funny, right? Like it's like that's actually the topic of the TMI show today is where the Democrats go from here. That's what she's alluding to, right? And it's kind of like, look, she's alluding to to Trump, and I would argue, and I'm working on the book that I'm about to just finishing up now. It's called Never Mind the Democrats, What's Left. And, in other words, what is the left outside of the Democratic Party? I mean, the Democratic Party, if they're going to recover from this, and obviously major parties have suffered traumatic defeats in the past. Goldwater in 1964. It's a long game. The way back is to find a vision that makes sense. That's a cohesive vision that you're going to be able to build from the grassroots, from the grounds up, all the way up, and eventually come back to power. Democrats don't seem to even be beginning that conversation. They don't have a cohesive or coherent ideology. They don't seem to really understand what's wrong and what's happened to their party. they're not getting. It's not even necessarily that Donald Trump and the Republicans had a better message. I mean, I think it was really the Democrats' election to lose, and they lost it. I don't think it was really that Trump ran a brilliant campaign. It was just it was political suicide, and I mean, just imagine, for example, if Kamala Harris had given a different kind of speech, alluding to what we were just talking about a few minutes ago, and had said, I would, like a lot of you, I was really shocked that so many people on social media were making fun of this guy who was murdered on a Manhattan street. But when I started thinking about it, between my own experience, my own families, my friends, I mean, I got to get real. And we didn't finish the job with the Affordable Care Act. We've got to now take it to the next level. Democratic Party needs to become, a hardcore proponent of Medicare for all. Bernie Sanders was right. Be like, okay, you guys are starting to listen. That's the thing. The Republicans, the only thing they have going for them is that, and it won them the election, was that at least they made people feel seen. I don't think they're going to solve anything, but that's a start. Democrats didn't make people feel seen at all. They, like, for example, about the migrant thing. Like,
Right.
I mean, I think Democrats don't understand. Like, being liberal used to be like, no, we're totally cool with illegal immigration. Well, I'm a leftist, and I want lots of legal immigration. I have to admit, I don't understand open borders. I don't know how you're a nation state if you don't know who's coming in across your border. I mean, what is a nation state? It is a set of territory that you can guard the border, and you decide who comes and goes. Right? That's what it is. I mean, you don't even have to have money that circulates to be a nation state. But like that, we don't even do that. And so it's kind of like a lot of Americans are like, I'm living in Kentucky. I don't see that many illegal immigrants, but this is this is weird. These feeds from the border in Texas, it's odd. Democrats, no, there's nothing odd. It's cool.
Well, they've done that with a few issues. I mean, like the inflation was one where they kept saying, "Oh, it's transient. It's transient." They acted as if
transient, but that's not. But so what?
But
transient. Like someone in Guantanamo who's being waterboarded. Oh, this is transient because we're going to run out of water and we're going to go out to lunch later. Well, it's transient.
I mean, but transient in that case made it look like it was a month or two, not necessarily 2 or 3 years, which is like more than half.
Live with those higher prices now forever and ever and ever.
Exactly, and the Democrats are like, yeah, that's not a big deal. Or genocide, yeah, that's not a big deal. You shouldn't care about that. Like, they continuously took this perspective that they were the smartest in the room, that the issues that they weren't concerned about were things that you shouldn't be concerned about. And mind you, social censorship is that on steroids. I mean, because basically what they tend to make the argument is, well, you shouldn't have cared about that in the context of the election. So I give you an example. 50 intelligence officials said so-and-so. Right. Okay, but they would continuously say, well, yeah, we censored the laptop because we didn't think that should have mattered in the case of the election. And it's like, who the F are you to tell me what I think should matter or not? And they
we'll
do that.
Decide that.
Yeah, it does matter, right?
We don't have much voice. The only voice we have really is that vote. And a lot of people are like, I'm going to use that vote to send a message, or I'm going to not use that vote also to send a message. I'm going to sit on my hands. Right. Which is what happened this time. I mean, that's the big untold story, right? 10 to 12 million Democrats. I mean, I thought 2016 was shocking. People say not voting doesn't have an effect. No, it has an effect.
It does.
3.5 million Bernie voters didn't vote for Hillary. And the whole, and Trump won. And in 2020, something they don't want you to remember, every Democrat on that stage, Klobuchar, Buttigieg, Booker, all corporatists, they all supported all the Bernie stuff, right? The $15 minimum wage, Medicare for all, student loan forgiveness. Why? They didn't want to. They had to. They were terrified of getting Bernied, right? So that does work, right? And so now, again, this is bigger. This is 3 times more people boycotted this election than in 2016 and let Trump win. If I'm the Democrats, I'm like guys, we got to wake up. Okay.
Yeah, that's a problem.
I mean,
we can't win elections.
Election
Democrats can't win
They're
an
setting
election under that
advantage of
model.
voter registration, right? I mean, Democrats, if people vote in equal proportionate to their numbers, Republicans never win, except like in
Right.
Alabama, like for sheriff. They never win. It's like, it's only, for Democrats, it's a turnout game, and they're not turning their people out.
Ted Rall, well, especially if you're bringing out Liz Cheney to try to enthuse the base. And by the way, I have to let you go, but there was an article, I believe, in the New York Times, and the article was talking about in Philadelphia how they didn't even go to like Black and Latino neighborhoods in Philly, instead trying to get effectively moderate Republicans in this kind of Chuck Schumer
How's that
plan.
working for you? Yeah.
Well, 8 million people stayed home, so there's that.
Right.
Ted
People
Rall,
don't like to be taken for granted.
no, they don't.
Yeah.
Political cartoonist, syndicated columnist, great friend of the show, the TMI morning show. You can check it out from 10 to 12. Ted, man, thank you for this. I really appreciate it, my man.
Thanks, Jamal. Anytime. Have a good show.
Right. Thank you. All right. I want to go to our next guest. We have Daniel Lazar, another good friend of the show, Daniel Lazar. Come on. How you doing this morning, Dan? You doing all right?
I'm just fine. How are
Excellent. I'm doing all right. Daniel Lazar is an independent journalist and author, best known as a critic of the U.S. Constitution, American politics, government, and social policy in general. He's written several books, including The Velvet Coup and America's Undeclared War, and many more. Man, thank you for this. I really appreciate you joining me today.
My pleasure.
So Europe is in flames. And Europe is in flames. And what I mean by that is specifically Georgia. I'm fascinated by what is taking place in Georgia right now. Europe seems to take this very clear plan to try to overthrow that government in the way that they did Ukraine. The president, Salome Zurabishvili, I believe the name is pronounced. She kept saying, I'm not going anywhere. I don't care about the results of the election. She loses the election. I would imagine she knew she was going to lose that election. And the new president, Georgian Mikhail Kalashvili, I may be pronouncing that name wrong. They're doing everything in their power to overthrow that government, and even getting Europeans involved in trying to do so. I mean, for God's sake, she was born French. Many people think she was a spy for the French, or at the very least a stalking horse for Europe. Give me what's going on the ground right now. I saw this massive police presence that they brought to bear to deal with the protests to prevent it from getting to that point of Maidan. And what's even wilder about this, right here, this clip, what's even wilder about this, it seems that the more nationalist governments in the European Union is protecting Georgia to prevent it from turning out like Ukraine. I mean, look at this police. I mean, this is a massive police presence trying to resolve their issue. The prime minister had already said this is not going to be another Maidan. Give me your take on all of this. This is fascinating. What context? How do you form this in your mind when you're thinking about these events that are taking place in Georgia right now?
Well, these protests have been going on for 18 or 20 days, night after night. It's extraordinary. And the government's under intense pressure, but it won the election quite clearly, and it's determined to stay in office. And as you said, they don't want a repeat of the Ukraine in the February of 2014, where the protesters set up a camp, and essentially were able to use that camp to sort of drive a wedge into the government and eventually overthrow it. Yeah. So there's a very heavy police presence. They're determined not to let the protesters dig in, but it's extraordinary. I mean, essentially, the EU is trying to overthrow a government, a legitimately elected government, and there's a bitter civil war erupting in the EU between. On one hand, you have Hungary and then Slovakia, which are battling this pro-US EU consensus, and it's splitting the union. But also, it's all everyone knows that in 4 weeks everything's going to change, and that is when Donald Trump comes into office. So it's kind of the storm before the storm. So everyone's expecting like a real change to ensue, a fundamental reorientation in international politics, and so they're battling it out for advantage in the final weeks leading up to that change.
Certainly, I mean, I'm curious on how the European citizens see this. I mean, there seems to be an orthodoxy between the United States and Europe, especially on this issue of war, on foreign policy. And you get Orban, Fico, who seem to be bucking that trend. And in the context of bucking that trend, I guess supporting some of the nationalist governments. And I don't mean support by actively going and doing something. I just mean trying to protect them through the device of the European Union, because Europe wants to pass sanctions. They want to do something similar. Oh, look at these peaceful protesters carrying lilies were beaten by cops, and they held on to the lily as they were being beaten by a cop. Yeah. And so we in Europe needs to come out and pass sanctions in order to crush the Georgian government. Like, this is just shameless and shallow at this point in regards to what they're trying to accomplish. Do you think the government is going to be able to withstand this level of pressure that is being continuously applied to it in this way?
Yes, I do, actually. I mean, it's very hard to say. I could be wrong, but my best guess is it will, because it knows that a big change is on the way. That they hold out for 4 or 5 more weeks, the entire international situation will shift, and it'll be a whole new ballgame. So therefore, I would, and that's why the opposition is pushing so hard, because they want to get, all their ducks in a row before the new ball game sets in. So everyone's rushing for advantage. But I think the government could very well hold out. They seem to be very determined, and they had an election, and that's the important thing. But by the way, it's not the U.S. versus the EU versus Georgia. It's this neocon party, which essentially has been in power across the U.S., the EU, into Korea, South Korea as well, and that party is now shaking and tumbling down. And in South Korea, there was this attempted coup d'état, imposition of martial law by a pro-American prime minister that collapsed. You have Trump taking office in the U.S. You have growing disarray in the EU, and you have this battle over Georgia, a very small country but strategically very important. It's the battle is reaching the climax.
Do you think this is a change of orthodoxy in the European Union at this point, especially with losing in Ukraine? Like, meaning, do you think part of this has to do with this kind of cascade effect of you've overthrown a country, you've dragged Europe to this kind of brink of war, you're trying to expand that war, whether in Moldova or, for that matter, whether in Georgia?
Yeah.
Like, meaning, is this the turn of the worm? Is this the European public? I mean, look at Germany, for example. Germany, the government has collapsed. The French government has, for all intents and purposes, collapsed, with Macron trying to put in one of his cronies as opposed to putting in one of the party members that was, part of the coalition that won. Is this the turn of the worm? Like, is this a change of context that Europe is trying to undergo? And will this affect the relationship between Europe and the United States if indeed they go in that direction? What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, in the Georgian Dream Party, they've been sounding this theme about a global war party, a global war party that wants to drag Georgia into the Ukraine war. And it's very funny because Wikipedia has an entry about the global war party, and they label it a conspiracy theory. But the Wall Street Journal just last weekend had a piece by Yaroslav Trifimov, one of their top correspondents, essentially asking, has World War III already begun? So there is this global war party. It's determined to extend the Ukrainian war. It wants to drag other countries into the war, to force them to adopt hostile anti-Russian policies. And those policies, however, do not have broad support, especially in Georgia, Romania, Moldova, etc. And there are a lot of cracks in the wall. So yeah, this global war party is collapsing because the war is going poorly, because the Ukraine is losing, and so therefore there's a growing dissatisfaction. The worst thing you can do in politics is lose a war. And when you lose a war, then you get your head chopped off, and either literally or figuratively. And so in this case, they have lost a war, and they are reaping they're paying the penalty for it.
What do you think this is going to mean for NATO, by chance? I mean, like moving forward from this, because you're right, they lost the war. In the context of that, they're doing everything in their power to, I don't know, I guess spin it to try to hold on for as long as possible. I mean, part of me even thinks that the thought is, well, we want to let this fall on Trump's lap as opposed to falling and collapsing under Joe Biden. But that's a secondary conversation. From the standpoint of NATO, what do you think this means for NATO? Is this the death knell to the significance and importance of NATO? Or are they going to look at this and try to basically double down on either the expansion or the adding in more money and that type of thing, resources into NATO? What are your thoughts?
I think they can't double down. I think that game is at an end. I mean, under Biden, NATO is expanding, is adopting extremely hostile anti-Russian, anti-Chinese rhetoric. I mean, the rhetoric was out of control. They were establishing bases in Latin America. I mean, Colombia was somehow brought on to NATO. I don't quite understand what the North Atlantic Treaty Organization is doing, in South America. There was talk about establishing an East Asian branch of NATO. I mean, it's a coalition. It's a military coalition in search of a war, and it was just getting out of control. And I think that is clearly at an end. I think that Trump has no sympathy for those policies, and I think that NATO is going to be drawn back. By the way, I'm not pro-Trump. I mean, I think that Trump, if anything, is going to usher in a period of actually increasing national conflict. I think that what we see in Syria could be a sign of things to come. I mean, you have the U.S., Turkey, Israel. I mean, all converging on that country. We don't know how. They're going to try to battle it out for control. We don't know what's going to happen. The U.S. has deep interest there. So more conflict will ensue as Turkey, the U.S., and Israel proceed to carve up Syria. And I think that we'll see more conflict ensue as well as the U.S. and other powers try to sort things out.
No, I agree with you on this. I didn't vote for Trump. Not a fan of Trump. I don't have the level of hysteria that I see among Democrats around Trump. If anything, I'm hoping that he stays with what he said on his sense of foreign policy, at the very least, to end wars and not necessarily start them. But I have no idea. He's a wild card. And hubristic people can end up in certain situations because of that hubris. So I agreed with you on Syria, agree with you on the chaos that may lead domestically. I guess by definition, if NATO goes belly up, doesn't it mean Europe is going to have to attend to their own security needs? And do you see? Yeah, please.
I don't think NATO will go belly up because if it goes belly up, then all hell breaks loose. Essentially, Europe is back where it was in 1931, 32, 33, and that was not a good place. So NATO, I don't think NATO will go up, but I think that NATO will definitely be forced to rein in its ambitions to stop this nonsense about East Asia and Latin America. And I think that Trump wants to end the war in the Ukraine, and that will clearly be at the expense of the NATO old guard, which has been deeply involved in pushing this war, and has lost. So when he says, when you lose a war, you get your head chopped off, and figuratively, or if not literally.
I'm curious from your point of view. I mean, this was always a red line for Russia. I mean, even under Boris Yeltsin, when all things being equal, Russia was, I'm not going to call them a vassal of the U.S., but definitely in a weaker position with regards to the U.S. Boris Yeltsin, Bill Clinton, even under that administration, it was still considered to be a fail and a red line. And then you get the net means net memo from William Burns, where he very clearly articulates this is going to create a civil war. It's going to be on their border. They're going to have to get involved, whether they want to or not. And yet they still kept going in that direction. I mean, do you think this was something that they saw in advance and they thought to themselves, oh, this is great. It's a Hobbes choice. They're going to either have to get involved where we have advantages if they get involved militarily and economically. And if they don't get involved, we at the very least have a platform for Ukraine where we can expand the borders of NATO. Meaning, did they sleepwalk into this? Or did they plow into this knowing full well the most likely outcome in regards to the conflict?
They sleepwalked. No, the disaster that took place in 2014 was just extraordinary.
Yes.
I mean, NATO. I mean, the neocons were so aggressive and so heedless of the risks, and so unwilling to consider this in a broader perspective. I mean, this is exactly as if Mexico had entered into an alliance with Russia or China against the U.S. Do you think the U.S. would have tolerated that for one instant? Absolutely not. I mean, the F-16s would have started scrambling within seconds. It's ridiculous to even imagine that. And Russia regarded the Ukraine as an equally sensitive area. Just as U.S. has deep cultural ties to Mexico, Russia has even actually far deeper cultural ties to the Ukraine, and the U.S. the neocons were completely heedless of that risk, unwilling to consider any of the countervailing tendencies, unwilling to even consider what the broad risks were. And so it was obvious that in 2014 they backed this coup d'état, led, as even the New York Times reported at the time, led by neo-Nazi forces, and the country then splintered immediately. Essentially, the uprising in Kiev was accompanied by parallel anti-Kiev uprisings in Donetsk and Luhansk, the Crimea, and Odessa. And the country exploded in civil war. And the civil war simmered for 8 years. And then finally, after more U.S. provocations, Russia went in. Now, once again, I'm not backing Russia. I'm not saying that Russia's decision to invade was correct. I'm not saying any of that, but nonetheless, it was predictable. Right. And the miscalculation on Washington's part was massive, absolutely massive. And now they're losing. This is and they're paying the price.
Yeah. I guess we all are on some level, especially with this level of brinksmanship that's taking place. What's fascinating about this too is the economic and political impacts. Like, meaning this has had geopolitical ramifications that have been somewhat expansive. I mean, even from the standpoint of the European economists. Angela Merkel, in her book, in her memoir, she pointed out that the U.S. seemed to be perfectly okay with destroying or injuring the European economies, which is pretty wild considering that Europe is supposed to be, I would argue we don't really have allies, we have vassals. But either way, we have countries that we're more closely associated with. But we don't seem to care that it's damaging Europe. I remember when this first started, and Macron goes out and says, well, hey, Joe, aren't we all in this together? And Joe Biden was like, no, we're not. Pay us. Give us the 5 times more for the energy costs that you guys are effectively paying for now. And if you look at the European economies, especially Germany, or for that matter, France, and some of these other countries, they are being decimated and being deindustrialized on some level as a direct result of policy they try to blame Russia. So, well, Russia went to Ukraine and then our gas policy went nuts. It's like, yeah, but you guys made those choices. I mean, I guess my thought is, will they be more sane European policies, especially if Macron gets taken out of office, if the German chancellor gets taken out of office in the snap elections coming up next year? What do you expect for the direction of European policy going forward after this moment in history?
Well, I expect first of all, I expect a further drift to the right. I think Le Pen is essentially, waiting in the wings, waiting to take over. I think we'll see a further right-wing drift in Germany with a growth by the AfD, the Alternative for Deutschland, which is the far right party. About energy policy, the sword of Damocles hanging over international politics is Nord Stream. I mean, this is.
By the way, they would never admit that, though. If you could read article after article, they would never bring it up.
This the way that this has been covered up by everybody is extraordinary. I mean, this is the elephant in the sitting room that no one wants to talk about. The U.S. blew up Nord Stream. That is quite clear. I mean, that should be our assumption. I mean, maybe if Tulsi Gabbard becomes director of national intelligence, she can launch an internal investigation to find out exactly what happened in September 2022. But any sober, balanced examination of the evidence leads you straight to the conclusion that it was the United States. This is not conspiracy theorizing. This is just it's a straightforward examination of the evidence. And no other theory has worked out. And the idea of the 5 Ukrainian saboteurs in a 50-foot yacht is just beyond ridiculous. So the U.S. crippled Germany's gas supply. It sabotaged it, and Germany has been hit very hard by high energy prices. Its economy has been flat for the last 3 or 4 years, and that is causing grave upset in the German population. So I think there's going to be growing disarray, growing dissatisfaction, but things are very turbulent, very turbulent. We'll see what happens when Trump comes in, but things are really in an uproar, and I think that they're not going to calm down after January 20th. If anything, they will heat up even further.
What are you expecting of Trump, by the way? Any expectations at all, whether it's foreign policy or, for that matter, domestic policy? I mean, I guess the question becomes, let's say, even if Trump is sincere about this notion that I want to end wars, not start them, do you think he's going to be able to do it? Is a president enough? Meaning, is one man, can one man effectively do it, even if he brings it? And by the way, this is even if you bring on a cabinet that is less hawkish. I mean, for God's sake, Rubio, Hegeseth, these people are just straight neocons. Huckabee, I forget the other one that was added onto the thing. Many of these people are just straight neocons. And yet, he also has people like RFK, Matt Gaetz, Tulsi Gabbard, people who seem to be less interventionalists. I mean, usually people of policy, this is a bit muddled and conflicted. What do you think he's aiming at with this, a cabinet arranged in this sort of way? Is he looking for some kind of balance? And what are you expecting from a foreign policy sense? Is a president enough to alter the orthodoxy of U.S. foreign policy?
Look, Trump is riding high. It's remarkable. I mean, he himself said, this time in 2016, everyone hated me. Now everyone loves me. When he opened up a session of the New York Stock Exchange, the floor erupted with chants of USA, USA, USA. The business class, the capitalist class adores him. They are just, they are thrilled. It's extraordinary. I expect total chaos. I think that that Trump is an authoritarian. I wouldn't call him a fascist. I think that term is not appropriate. It's just simply technically and historically not the right term, but he is definitely an authoritarian. We'll see if he follows through in his threats to deport 11 million immigrants. If he makes any gesture in that direction, the results will be tragic. I'm talking about families torn apart, children abandoned. It's going to be just heart-rending. And the damage to democracy, to civil liberties will be extraordinary. Are we really going to have concentration camps in the United States? So far, that is what Trump seems to indicate. Now, everyone discounts Trump's rhetoric. Everyone assumes he's just sort of engaging, just sort of talking, off the top of his head. But if he is serious about this, it is going to be very dramatic. And in terms of foreign policy, Trump, things are blowing up. The Ukraine, just assassinated a Russian general. It really is doing its best to extend the war. In other words, to present the U.S. and Europe with a wider war that it really can't turn off. Putin, of course, is furious. So therefore, when he and Trump sit down to negotiate an end to this war, he's going to drive a very hard bargain and will want further concessions from the U.S., perhaps involving Iran. We can't be sure. Certainly involving Georgia, and the question whether Trump, gives in or says no, and therefore maybe the war in the Ukraine will resume if Trump and Putin wind up at loggerheads. And the situation in the Middle East is, of course, extraordinary. That region is just being devastated, and that's a big problem with Trump as well. He doesn't, he owns half of the northwestern portion of Syria, the Syria to the west of the Euphrates River. Americans are stealing Syrian oil as we speak. They're backing the Kurds, who are enemies of Turkey. So we have elements of a major conflict there. It's just really unclear. I think that things are really in chaos, and I expect that chaos to increase.
Is it fair to say that the Kurds are screwed in the situation? That Blinken went over to have a conversation with the Turkish foreign minister's counterpart, and I have a hard time believing that Turkey, both of us, Turkey and the U.S., and for that matter, Israel, backed the terrorists in order for them to take over the country. You had multiple groups that were involved under the HTS, what they were calling HTS. But at the end of that, let's say, takeover period, you did get Turkey that seemed to be more in charge and more in control of the rebels. For God's sake, Donald Trump even came out and said, well, Turkey is effectively responsible. He absolves the U.S. of blame in this situation, but whatever. It's Trump. It's the way he talks about it. Blinken goes over to have a conversation with his counterpart. The Kurds who were on the ground, there are articles where they were begging Israel to get involved to help them because they were losing territory to the groups that are in power now in Syria. And for that matter, going through the U.S. trying to get assistance from the U.S. to hold Turkey's hand in this kind of takeover of the Syrian government. Do you really believe that they're going to avoid getting their hands on the most profitable land in Syria in this way? Meaning, I don't get the sense that Turkey, pushing the rebels in this case, are going to avoid pushing out, or at the very least attempting to push out America, and definitely crushing the Kurds, considering they have the opportunity to do so because they're effectively surrounded. You have on one side Turkey, on the other side a group that's pushed by Turkey. Give me your thoughts on this. Is it going to be a situation where the U.S. prevents it? Can the U.S. even prevent it? I know they have a few troops on the ground. Give me your thoughts on this.
It's a mess. First of all, Erdogan, the president of Turkey, is he's a tough guy.
Yes, he is.
I despise him. He's terrible, but he has held on to power for years and years. His obituary has been written 1,000 times and never has come to pass. He is essentially a neo-Ottoman. He wants to extend Turkish influence into Central Asia and also into the Middle East. I mean, as you know, Syria was once part of the Ottoman Empire. And so it looks like he is taking over Syria. He clearly has taken over Syria, and he probably wants to dislodge the Kurds, whom he sees as a direct threat to Turkish control. The U.S., we have Donald Trump, who ideologically is very similar to Erdogan, and Trump wants Syrian oil. He has made a pledge to the Kurds that he's loath to break, and then there's Iraq, a U.S. colony, which has every reason to fear Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, HTS, the rebranded Al-Qaeda that has taken over Syria. So there's a prospect of a broader war there. I think the HTS will lead to the Afghanization of Syria, and Syria is a country that's far more important geopolitically than Afghanistan, and I think that's disastrous. So I don't know what Trump's going to do. Is he going to sell out the Kurds? Is he going to abandon Iraq and then just stand by and watch as Al-Qaeda takes over Syria? It's hard to believe. But on the other hand, he doesn't want to get embroiled in a war in the Middle East. So therefore, we don't know what kind of deal he has cooked up.
No, that's a good point. Yeah, that's a good point. That's just chaos. I mean, for all intents and purposes, do you think Israel's going to regret helping this group consolidate in Syria? I mean, for God's sake, it's a terrorist organization that's effectively on their border that is now ostensibly in control, or at the very least wrestling and fighting for control of the state apparatus. That seems to be fraught with issues. There was in the article where they were pointing out, where they were begging Israel to get involved, to help them. They were like, "You're the strongest in the area. Everybody's afraid of you. Help us, help us." And they point out, they says, "Look, they're not going after you now, but at some point you will be a target." And Israel, with the diplomat who was reporting in that story, who was talking about it, basically acknowledged that's true. We accept that they are not coming after us now. Part of the reason we're destroying everything in Damascus and everything in the bombing campaigns, I mean, like 500 strikes or something to that effect. But they acknowledged that at some point, when the state apparatus is consolidated, Israel will become a target. Do you buy that? And if so, can they really be that comfortable with this organization on their border?
Well, I mean, I think that Israel is essentially locked in a forever war with the surrounding Middle East. I mean, Israel is comfortable with no one on its border. Even Egypt makes it nervous, and the same thing with Jordan. But certainly, Lebanon's a broken country, and Syria has been smashed. And HTS, I don't think that Israel fears anything militarily from HTS. HTS is they're nothing, and Israel's military domination of the region has never been more dramatic than it is now. I mean, it is extraordinary. I mean, in '67, the Israelis smashed the Arab nationalist movement, and in 2023, 24, they have equally as thoroughly smashed the Islamist movement, and there's just nothing left now. HTS, may carry on as a Turkish proxy force, but they are not remotely in a position to engage with the Israelis militarily. Listen, Hamas started a war on October 7th, 2023. Hezbollah joined in. They have now been destroyed. Israel's domination of the region has never been more overwhelming. Netanyahu is the king of the Middle East. It is quite a turnabout. And so So I don't think Israel is too worried about HTS, and they're quite happy to see Syria divided, weakened, devastated by these Islamist forces. I mean, it's a tragedy, an absolute tragedy for the Syrian people. And I mean, Syria itself is, this is the heart of the Middle East, culturally, politically, historically. I mean, to see it brought down in this fashion is, to me, just tragic.
Yeah, my heart goes out to the people on the ground.
Yeah.
Look, personally, I think the war, I think October 7th was a date. I think something dramatic happened on that date with a lot of people being killed, but I don't think it started on October 7th. I mean, this has been something that's been going on for a while, even though I agree with you that it was a dramatic attack, that Israel used it as its casus belli in order to reshape the Middle East. I think last time we talked, I don't think I would have agreed that Israel was the dominant military power in the region, but I agree with you now. I think it goes without saying. I mean, Hezbollah has been decapitated. Hamas, or that, for that matter, Gaza has been isolated. The West Bank is going to get annexed. And Syria is going to be in chaos for the foreseeable future in the way that Afghanistan and Libya ended up in chaos, or for that matter, Iraq. So no, you have been more right in your analysis on this one than I will have been. Daniel, man, thank you for this. I really appreciate this, honestly. Thank you. You have a good one. Daniel Lazar. He is an independent journalist and author, best known as a critic of the U.S. Constitution, American politics, government, and social policy in general. He has written several books, including The Velvet Coup and America's Undeclared War. You can follow Daniel on X at DH and you can find his column on weeklyworker.co.uk and many other outlets. Daniel, man, really good. Thank you for this. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. We are going to keep this show ticking along. In a few minutes, we're going to get Carl Zha. He's going to come on to have a conversation about China. China is executing a business leader. Apparently, the guy embezzled, I think it was several $1 million, like hundreds of millions of dollars or something to that effect. And he will be executed. That is going to take place. Before I get to that, if you guys dig this content, and if you find yourself coming back to this show often, I run 7 a.m. to 10 a.m. Monday through Friday. Definitely give the show a like. Definitely share this content. Hit the subscribe to the notification bell and subscribe to the channel. My objective is 40K by the end of the year. It is a challenge, but damn it, I think it's a challenge that we can do. On top of that, if you guys really dig the content, you can always support this content through PayPal, Patreon, or for that matter, Super Chats or stickers, whatever you want to call it. All stickers will be read, providing they're not racist, sexist, or bigoted. Even if you want to take the piss out of me in a sticker, I will also read that. I also want to give a shout out to all of the new members. I think there are about 20 members, give or take. Welcome to the family. That's the way I think about it. Welcome to the Thomas family. You guys are supporting this content, and I appreciate you for doing so. You are the ones that allow this show to function, to run, and allow me to be here at this dispatch box, doing the news, domestic, international, best damn morning show, as I like to call it. So thank you, all of you, whether it's a like, whether it's a view, whether it's a share, whether it's a buck, whatever it is, thank you. It is much and decently appreciated. I want to go to, for the moment before Carl gets here, about a communication that was taking place at Wright Air Force Base, Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. I want you to listen to what is being said here, because then I'm going to show Kirby's comment. Because Kirby still seems to be arguing that these are civilian craft, everything is great, there's nothing to see here, there are no threats. And it's like, okay, but you don't know what it is. So how do you know if it's a threat or not if you can't identify what it is? It's very strange. Now, you can identify it as not being a threat if you know what it is. It's that part. Kirby still seemed to insinuate that this stuff hasn't necessarily gone through military bases, but this military base would disagree with Kirby, making this a very weird scenario. Donald Trump has pointed out these people know something and they need to level with the American public. And the fact that they're not leads to questions of why not. For example, they had a briefing, a classified briefing. And as a journalist asked them, it's like, wait a minute, why is this a classified briefing if this is just people, hobbyists, playing around with drones? Some of these drones were 6 feet in length. That doesn't necessarily sound like a hobbyist. It sounds like a military drone. I want to play for the moment Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. Listen to the communication that was taking place and notice what he says. Drones, more than one in the airspace.
1,900 feet, about 7 miles southwest of the field, like transition your Delta northeastbound.
Med Flight 8 Patterson Tower, use extreme caution for heavy UAS movement on the base. Security forces is handling the situation. Suggest at or above 1,700 AGL.
That we will maintain 2,000 and on our transition for Med Flight 8.
And I gotta keep the lights down so that security forces can see.
Roger that, no problem.
Position approved, sir.
Approved, Med Flight 8.
All right. Drones on the ground. Air Force Base recognizes it. They need drones in the airspace. So they close down the airspace. Kirby, yesterday, I believe this was yesterday, or maybe a couple of days ago, came out and said this.
In the United States alone.
But this is different, it seems. These are bigger. They're 6 feet in diameter, a lot of them. There was a reporter the other day that saw 50 coming from the coast at one.
Come on. I'm trying to start this.
Pack. Joining us now to talk about these mysterious drones flying over parts of the U.S., White House National Security Communications Advisor, retired Admiral John Kirby. John, thanks for being here.
Okay.
You hear all of these officials. You've heard a lot of concern, a lot of coverage. Where are you tonight on this?
As we look at the information we've got, Brett, and we've now examined some 5,000 different sightings, we've added detection capabilities, additional observers. As you and I stand here today, to date, our assessment is that this is lawful, legal, commercial, hobbyist, and even law enforcement aircraft activity. Some of it's manned, some of it's unmanned. We absolutely acknowledge that a lot of these are probably drones, but they're flying legally. And it is legal to fly drones in non-restricted airspace as long as you're registered with the FAA. And there's thousands and thousands of these kinds of flights every single day. I think.
See, the problem with the statement is that it's not just in unrestricted airspace. This has taken place, as I pointed out, in multiple military bases here in the U.S., whether it was Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, and there were 2 other bases where there were drones in the area that shut down, or at the very least, that were worrying pilots. I want to play this other clip. So when the various mayors in New Jersey were presented with the information, this was their response. Because again, the mayors have to deal with this. They're on the ground and they're getting a story that is different than what the federal government is implying. Listen to the mayors.
Helicopters and other images, including lights that are mistakenly reported as drones.
The mayors responded angrily.
This has been going on since November 8th. The air traffic right here in the borough of Florham Park, where I am the mayor of, has never been as big as it is today. And pretty curious to me that on November 18th, the Morristown Airport Tower was not aware of the drones flying in our area.
Public obtained the entire conference call between the mayors, the White House, the FBI, DHS, and the FAA, which ran from around 3:30 p.m. East Coast today to just before 4:30.
You can say these are small aircraft. You can say these are manned. They're not. So I think if anyone was to take away from this that the drones aren't flying, they also must believe that the border is closed. I just don't want to hear any longer that we don't know where they're coming from, because you should know that.
One mayor said he had one drone over his house.
I'm from Edison, New Jersey, smack center of New Jersey, and right above my house, I had 2 drones that were the size of vehicles. I understand that there's a lot of lawfully owned drones, but I just want to stress that it was above my house. I have a video of it. It's not, it's not a small drone, and it was real. It was probably 100, maybe a couple hundred feet above me.
That is pretty astonishing. I mean, that's like all of that is astonishing. And the wild part about it is Lou Elizondo, the one that ran the ATIP program for the U.S. for the federal government. This was Harry Reid's program that was under AWOS, where they were effectively studying UFOs for Congress. Elizondo was found. They put a mic in his face. And keep in mind, Elizondo studied this stuff for the U.S. government. And the point that he's making is they are lying. He was like the flight characteristics of some of these drones. And again, we're not talking about all drones. Some of these things are airplanes. Some of these things are commercial vehicles. So fair enough. We're not talking about those. We're talking about the ones that are giving very strange flight characteristics associated with the way they are flying. I want to play 2 more clips first before I get to Lou. This was right here. This was the Pentagon being asked, well, wait a minute. Why are you guys getting classified briefings if these are just commercial drones? That makes no sense.
Hobbyist drones, they're not military drones. Why is it a classified briefing on the Capitol Hill?
I'd have to refer you to Congress on that. Again, sharing as much information as we can here. I don't have the briefing in front of me, so I can't tell you specifically, what aspects are classified or not.
That is super bizarre. That is super, super bizarre. And Elizondo pointed out that not having a heat signature, the characteristics where these things seem to be pulling heavy G's, the staying in the air for 5-6 hours, is all of that stuff is very strange. And for the federal government to say, well, these are just legal drones. Well, the problem is that they are flying in restricted airspaces. And for the government to seemingly not have an actual answer, but to just say, well, these are perfectly safe. How do you know they're perfectly safe if you don't know what they are? And it's not that I think that somebody's being shot or hit or something like that, but there is a disconcerting aspect of this where the federal government doesn't seem to know what is in our airspace, despite the fact of spending $1 trillion a year on military. It is very, very strange. But to put that to the side for the moment, I want to bring in my guest, a good friend of the show, Carl Zha. Carl Zha is host of Silk and Steel podcast focused on China and surrounding regions and their history, culture, and their politics. You can follow Carl on Twitter at Carl Zha. You can follow his podcast on Twitter at Steel Silk In, and subscribe and support the podcast at patreon.com, Silk and Steel, the man of the hour. What's going on, Carl? How you doing today? You doing all right?
I'm doing good, Jamar. How are you?
I'm doing good. I have been fascinated by this drone stuff. Initially, I wasn't really paying that much attention to it. And then there seemed to be, I started paying attention when there was a discrepancy between what the federal government was saying versus what people on the ground were saying. And at the point where you have the Coast Guard saying, well, I was followed by 20 to 30 drones. And the federal government is like, oh, these are just, man-piloted vehicles. I was like, okay, you've piqued my interest. So, well, somebody is lying in this case, and I don't think it's the Coast Guard. But that's a secondary story. That's what's taking place here. That's one of the big news here in the States. I
like the initial story when they say it was drones launched from an Iranian mothership.
The mothership connection. Well, yeah. I mean, look, man, we have a lot of paranoid people in the States. And the idea is like, yeah, there's a Iranian mothership on our coast that are launching drones.
It's a military base. It's near a U.S. military base. The government don't want you to know about it. I mean, it's probably they're testing some secret weapon platform. This is why this is why UFO only visit United States, Jamar. But anyway, so let's.
I gotta be honest. I don't know. I mean, in the very beginning, I mean, look, my first thought is the government is doing something that they don't want to tell. I just don't know what that something is. And you would think that they need to get their story straight if they're gonna. I mean, because it feels like they fell into this ass backwards. Like, meaning they hit this after the public was screaming about it, after the public was freaking out because they kept showing images and video images, one video after the next of all of these things flying in Jersey. And then when they started visiting military bases, okay, well, now we have a different conversation. Like, it's very strange. That's all. It's just very, very strange. KJ, I brought you on because I saw the story about, I think the name is Li Jinping. You can correct me on the pronunciation. But he apparently was caught embezzling $412 million. And whereas in the United States, that's just called good business, a good capitalist. In China, that's called illegal. And he was executed by the state, which is, again, for the US, that is astonishing because corruption is as American as apple pie. And every random blue moon, you get one of these kind of one percenters. But for all intents and purposes, most of the people you're executing are just poor people who might stick up a store and take a few bucks. And because it's a stick up and it's a robbery, that counts as kind of a murder charge. In this case, this was pure embezzlement. And this is the way China effectively deals with corruption. It's don't do this. There will be consequences. Give me your take on this. What is your thoughts on this?
Well, I had to do a double take because normally for corruption, you see a lot of people daily news about corrupt official gets sentenced to death. You see that a lot, but a lot of time if you read the fine print, read the detail, they say they get sentenced to death with a suspended death sentence with 2 years reprieve. What normally happens in those cases is after 2 years, if they are on good behavior in prison, the sentence get commuted to life imprisonment. That's what normally happens. So I had to take a double take when I saw, no, they didn't sentence him. They executed him. so I have to dig in a little deeper to see what happened. So his corruption case is one of the biggest corruption case that has uncovered in recent history. I mean, it's $400 million. It's not a small sum of money, and he's not even a big honcho. He's like he was in charge of developing the special economic zone in the capital of Inner Mongolia. So basically, he's in collusion with the real estate developers, and there's a lot of corruption. But I think when I look at his sentencing a little deeper, he was in fact sentenced to death with 2 years reprieve. Which would mean normally he would serve his 2 years, and the sentence will get commuted to life imprisonment. But he got another sentence thrown at him, which is collusion with a crime syndicate. And it's that additional charge in combination with the corruption that got him. There was no reprieve. There was they combined the sentences. It just became suspended death sentence to real death sentence. And this is why he got executed.
Real death sentence.
So he's probably, I'm guessing he's probably in cahoots with some mafia bosses breaking somebody's legs. So that's a little bit more serious than just taking money on the down low. So this is why he's it's actually pretty exceptional in China when the execution do get carried out, because what normally happens is the sentence get commuted to lifetime in prison, and most of the corrupt officials, they get just rot in jail for the rest of their life. But this guy, I think it's a mafia connection that really got him. But even that is kind of normal in the United States, right? I mean, people like that get to elected, Speaker of the House. But
It's called good capitalists.
yeah, I mean,
You know, as
I saw a
well.
lot of
No, no.
people in US commenting on X. They're posting that Gordon Patterson meme where he says, "Oh Lord Jesus, I see what you've done for other people. Can you please do that for me?"
Well, because you must understand, like, look, I put it to you this way. Corruption is so endemic in the US, and the public feels like the government doesn't have their back, that the government is effectively working for the side with the most cash, with the most capital. And so for us, we have become so accustomed to the just raw, unadulterated corruption that is just like suffocating. Like Nancy Pelosi, for example, you know, doing stocks while in Congress is just grotesque. And yet it's part of the fabric of the way we operate. These corporations and everything else. There's a sense that the American public is not, or I'm sorry, the American government is not working in the interest of the American public, that is working in the interest of the people who are paying them. And those people are absolutely right. And so when we see something like this happen, you get a segment of the population that applauds. Like, honestly, like the CEO that just got whacked for the United Healthcare. The majority of the population approves a murder. Like they're like, I mean, you even got to the point where people are like, oh, he's so sexy. We need to forgive. Forgiveness is divine. We need to let him go. I mean, Ted Rall was on the show and so it was like, if I'm on that jury, that man walks. Like, that's where we are. So you can understand, right, where the majority of the American public looks at that case and say, clean murder. Well, when they look at China and they're actually doing something about corruption, well, you don't have to go to a person taking it upon their hands to be a vigilante, where Chinese government is like, no, we don't tolerate corruption. Full stop. You will get a few
Jamar,
people.
this is why superhero is popular in US. Because we know we cannot count on our government to do the job. So we need vigilantes. We need vigilante to deal justice.
Yeah. I mean, that's what it kind of boils down to, right? Like, is there a difference? There is a difference between China executing somebody for just grotesque corruption and Luigi killing the guy on his own. And I guess the difference is a process of state. One is the country coming together saying corruption is intolerable, and we will take a legal solution to deal with corruption and give a warning to anybody else that's coming behind them that's going to do it, as opposed to the government is not going to do anything about this. The government codifies this, meaning there's no political solution to the issue of the way insurance companies act, deny care, and maximize their profits. And so you get a vigilante that takes it into his own hands. And so it's like, yeah, both people got killed, but there's a difference between a government process that is making a decision based on due diligence and law versus laws that protect these people for fleecing the population, where the population has to take it upon their own self to do it. It's just fascinating.
Jamar, we don't have corruption in the United States. We have transparency. It's called lobbying and campaign financing. Right. It's all above the table, Jamar.
Right.
We have transparency.
It's like you get to know who's buying your politicians. Isn't that a positive thing? That's called democracy. I mean, hell, we even went so far as to say
we can see the price tag of the politicians who got bought by AIPAC.
Yeah.
We can see how much they're getting paid. And we have politicians like Richie Torres, who's really working for cheap. You know, I like, why are you showing for Israel so hard? They're not even giving you that much money.
$100 million. They spent $100 million just in the primaries alone. It's grotesque. I mean, and then to make this argument that money equals speech. And so the person with the most money can yell the loudest. And it's like, okay, that's not democracy. That's something else. Like that's what I mean when I said this kind of oligarchical system that has been instantiated with laws to protect the system in place.
We have an oligarchy that runs elections in US, Jamar.
Yes.
We have that for a long time now.
Unfortunately, yeah. I mean, I guess my point is when we see something like this, you will get a segment of the population that applauds the fact that China is being aggressive on this issue of corruption. I mean, I remember the last case where you pointed out, it's like, yeah, but that guy's most likely going to be commuted. And I didn't understand how he could get further charges while in jail. Because I think they said something like execution pending
No.
X amount of time.
Right. So what happened is that all the sentences happened together. So for the corruption and taking bribes, that he got the charge of a death sentence with 2 years reprieve. But then he got another sentence of colluding with criminal syndicate, and then they combined the two sentences.
Oh, I see. So that charge took place before he was convicted of the second of the. Okay, so he got convicted first, but they merged the two charges together.
Yes. That's what happened. That's why.
I see. Yeah, I see. Yeah. Wow, just fascinating. The differences in the systems and what they allow versus what they don't allow. Carl, I'm curious on something. What is China's response to Syria collapsing?
So this is interesting because throughout the 13 years of Syrian war, China mostly stayed in the background. They let Russia took the charge front and center during the military intervention in 2015, supporting the Assad government throughout until 2020 when the conflict was frozen. And also Iran. Iran's provided a lot of material support for the Assad government as well. Whereas China was more playing the role of the economic backer. It was providing economic aid to the Assad government and providing diplomatic assistance in the UN when China used its China rarely uses veto power in the Security Council, but in case of Syria, China had used it like 6-7 times, but then again, China traditionally have a non-interference foreign policy. China do not send its troops abroad like the way Russia does. China do not send its expeditionary force all the way to Middle East. Like people kind of expect China would behave like the United States, but that's not how China functions. So now the two players who are directly backing Assad government, Russia and Iran, they basically have kind of throw in the towel because the government collapsed so quick. Everything took place basically within 10 days. By the time they had the Doha meeting between Russia, Turkey, and Iran, it was already too late. The jihadi rebels were already in Damascus. So at this point, China, there's not much China could do. And what China would like, though, is China will probably wait to see how things develop. Because what China will do is China will always do business with a government that's internationally recognized. Currently, Syria do not have an internationally recognized government anymore. Assad's government was internationally recognized. It has UN representation, but now it's kind of wide open question. I mean, it looks like what's going to happen is U.S. and NATO countries are working really hard to rebranded Al Qaeda and present them as a legitimate government for the new Syria. And so we're going to have to see what happened on that and whether they're going to lift the sanctions. Because first of all, U.S. still have the Caesar Act, which Trump during his first term signed in, designed to strangle the Syrian economy to cause this regime collapse. And essentially that's what happened. What we witnessed is U.S. sanction actually work in this case because people on the ground in Syria, the Syrian Arab army, their officers were getting paid like $30 a month, and their recruits were getting paid $7 a month. Those are like survival wages, barely subsistence wages. So that's why some of them were prone to be bought off, for example, by money from the Gulf countries. Because we have reports of many of these soldiers. They while they're fighting, they suddenly receive an order to withdraw and pull back, And we saw that in Aleppo when the Syrian Arab army pulled back without a fight, and in Hama they put out a fight for a couple of days, and then with a certain order to withdraw. We don't exactly know where the order come from, but we have reports of the Syrian Arab army general in contact with so-called intermediaries in UAE. So my guess is money exchanged hands. People got bought off, and there's not much China could do at this point. But China do have some interest in Syria because right now one of the rebel force that was like the spearhead for the push to Damascus is the Turkestan Islamic Party, which is composed of mostly Uyghurs from China. And so from the time period from 2012 to 2015, this was when this is the timeline that Seymour Hersh reported on when U.S., Turkey, NATO, they ran rat line to send all the jihadis from Libya and also from Europe to Syria to topple Assad. But there's another rat line that goes to send these Uyghurs to Syria. This was actually reported by Associated Press back in 2018. So what happened was these Uyghurs were leaving China, and they go, but the Chinese border around Central Asia in Xinjiang was locked down. But the Chinese border in the south with Southeast Asia was relatively porous because it has been peaceful. But the Uyghurs, being Chinese citizens, they can travel anywhere in the country. So they will take a train to take a high-speed train from Xinjiang to southwest China. In a couple of hours, will arrive at the border in the southwest, where the border is relatively porous with Myanmar, with Laos, Vietnam, etc. If you dig in reports around 2012, 2014, at that time period, you will see reports of U.S. diplomatic battles with China on what to do with these detained Uyghurs who were caught crossing border illegally into Southeast Asian countries like Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, Thailand, and even Indonesia. And United States urged them these countries not to repatriate these Uyghurs back to China, where U.S. said they will face persecution. Instead, any Uyghurs who made their way to Malaysia, to the Malaysian capital, Kuala Lumpur, when they go to the Turkish consulate, Turkish embassy, they're provided with quote-unquote fake Turkish passport, which allow them to board a plane from Malaysia to fly to Turkey. And as soon as they step off the airplane at the Istanbul airport, their quote-unquote fake Turkish passport get taken away, and they're met with jihadi recruiters who send them straight to Syria. And this is how thousands of Uyghur fighters have been holed up in Idlib. And there are various reports on the numbers, and most of the report estimate is about 5,000 fighters, but together with their family, maybe 20,000 Uyghurs. I saw and I saw their propaganda videos very recently of these Uyghur fighters returning to Idlib. They're welcomed by their large family. So I mean, it's plausible. 5,000 fighters plus their family, 20,000 Uyghur total is quite possible. So this is present a problem. This is also going to be a problem with whatever new Syrian government in the relationship with China, because Jolani, the new ruler of Damascus, have just announced that they're thinking about granting citizenship to all the foreign fighters who fought for New Syria, and they said they're going to they're thinking about granting Syrian citizenship to anyone who lived in Syria for 5 years. So that will include these Uyghur fighters who help the rebranded Al-Qaeda's push into Damascus, because the Turkish Islamic Party is affiliated with Al-Qaeda. There are Al-Qaeda branch. In fact, the Turkestan Islamic Party's head was sitting on Al-Qaeda's High Shura Council. So So these are well known to United States, but they pretend not to understand. In fact, Pompeo, before he stepped down during the first Trump term, what he did was he took the Turkestan Islamic Party off the terrorist list. so there's that issue that China and whatever new government in Syria will have to contend with, and then it's also the matter of international recognition. China will not do business with any government that's not being recognized internationally. But there are exceptions. Taliban, Taliban is probably the closest. It's the only exception that I think of but that's because Afghanistan is a neighbor, and Taliban they are the government in Afghanistan, so China have to deal with them. But Syria is a quite different matter because Syria is not a neighbor, and I think China is just waiting to see how the fallout of the collapse of the Syrian government is going to turn out.
One of the interesting things about the Uyghurs, they're saying that they're going to go back to China now that they've gotten all of this battle experience, that they've been fighting, and that they've liberated, quote unquote, Syria, that China is next. For all of those people who were talking about this genocide of the Uyghurs, and China was making this argument like, look, these people have been radicalized and we have to do something to deprogram the people who are radicals in this country. And this was the way they went about trying to deal with that. Like if you had somebody in America, for example, let's say like Nazis, and you needed to somehow get those people to not be Nazis. How do you do that? You can kill them. Okay, but let's say you don't want to kill your own citizenry. So what do you do? That's the issue, right? We put people in prison all the time for committing crimes, and those prisons are horrible locations. Now, I don't necessarily know what the Uyghurs are living in, but everything that I've heard.
You know what the European country's solution for de-radicalization is? They sent them to Syria and Iraq to join ISIS. I mean,
There's
all
that
these European bodies, all of them have been under surveillance by MI6 and other European intelligence agency for years. This comes out after like a terrorist attack in Europe, for example. Then they realize, oh, these guys have been on watch list for years.
Mhm.
And these guys, so they just allow them. I mean, I don't think it's more. I think it's more than turning a blind eye, because they're actually actively sending jihadis, for example, from Libya to Syria. I mean, they are, if anything, they will probably facilitated these guys travel to Syria and.
I don't doubt it. I mean, Giuliani still has a $10 million bounty on his head by the U.S. And so it's like, and I remember somebody asked, so what? They don't know where he is as he's overthrowing the government of Syria? It's like, certainly they're aware of where he is, what he's doing, and more likely than not, an asset of the U.S.-Turkish, proxy war on Syria. So no, I don't disagree with you on that. I guess my thing is, let me ask it this way. What are the conditions that the Uyghurs are in China? I don't believe for a moment it's a genocide, so I don't buy that.
So
I
yeah,
suspect it's a
that giant
reorientation
genocide is a hoax. I mean, people can see what's happening in Gaza. That's a genocide. I mean, where are the videos of China bombing cities in Xinjiang? Where are the videos of refugee camps around China's borders? It's because that's what happens in a genocide. You're going to see massive refugees flooding everywhere. You're going to see this is 2024. You're going to have videos leaking out no matter what. What happened was China went through this de-radicalization program for the radicalized Uyghurs, and by 2019, Chinese government actually announced they have closed down all the de-radicalization camps. Nobody's in camps anymore. And this was reported by New York Times, Washington Post, but they cast their skepticism. They're like, oh, well, allegedly Chinese government said that. But in every other media, there are people still talking like They're still talking about millions of Uyghurs being genocided in the concentration camps. Today, life in Xinjiang is returning to normal because China had probably one of the most successful de-radicalization programs. Initially they did have de-radicalization camps. The goal was always to return these people to society. It's not to like quarantine. It's not just to quarantine them and to let them rot in jail. It's to de-radicalize them, but also to train them, give them job skills, so when they come out, they can be productive citizens. And this is where the U.S. sanctions kicks in. And that's when U.S. have now sanctioning on any product that's coming in Xinjiang that employs any Uyghur labor, because they're claiming any Uyghurs working in China is a slave labor, is a slave. So we cannot have slave labor. So that's why the U.S. custom is investing a lot of money to investigate whether textile are using Xinjiang cotton, for example. They're trying to pressure all the Western companies to close down their supply chain, to move their supply chain away from Xinjiang. And it's also used as an excuse to sanction Chinese-made solar products, because a lot of Chinese-made solar panels, they're made in Xinjiang because Xinjiang has big desert, has a lot of sand, but it's all that. This all shaped up to the U.S. sanction on China later. I mean, first it was they used as an excuse to for the human rights ground. They claim China is using slave labor. China is claiming that U.S. is claiming that China is using slave labor to pick cotton in Xinjiang because this is like 100% projection, right? I mean, because U.S. its own history with slaves working the cotton field, and even today, U.S. prison system is a large slave labor camp.
Excuse me, Carl. I hate to interrupt this, but it's 8 cents to slave labor. I think they pay them like 8 cents an hour or something like that. I'm sorry. I just wanted to correct that is 8 cents away from slavery.
Yeah. Thank you. And so this is a lot of projection, but people buy it because people know about U.S. They know all these kind of shitty things that happened in U.S. history, and then they just say, oh yeah, it's also happening in China because China bad, of course. This is how the info war, propaganda war works, is to convince people there's really no alternative to the U.S. system. U.S. system may be bad, but China is even worse. Don't think there's an alternative to what you got. What we have is the best we can do for you guys. And so in other words, right now there's so many. China is open, by the way. If you have a valid Chinese visa, you can visit Xinjiang region. You don't need a special permit to travel to Xinjiang. So now if you go to YouTube, you actually see a lot of vloggers who are now traveling to Xinjiang, documenting what they see, and not just Western vloggers. You have vloggers from the Arab world, from Southeast Asia. You have Indonesian Muslims traveling to Xinjiang. You have Indian vloggers traveling to Xinjiang. You can find everything on YouTube. And this is why they even try to shut down that avenue of information. Now you have mainstream media saying, oh, these vloggers, they're all just helping propagating, pushing communist propaganda, And this is also why United States, for some time, they slapped China with a level 3 warning on travel, placing China on the same level as Ethiopia, a country that's in active civil war. Right. Yeah. And recently they quietly dialed down to travel, like there's a warning to level 2. But, it's still kind of ridiculous. China is one of the most safest country to travel to. And as I mentioned, there's no restriction on traveler going to Xinjiang. So all you need is a Chinese visa. And China made coming to China very easy in 2024. So for most of the European countries, EU countries, now they get 30 days visa-free travel to China. But for for Americans and British, for people in UK who don't get that visa-free travel, now there's a 10-day transit, visa-free transit travel. So if you are flying to China and then go to a third country, you get to stay in China 10 days visa-free. And previously it was only restricted to one city that you could visit, but now they took away the restrictions, so you can travel freely within China for those 10 days, provided you are leaving at the end of the 10 days to another third country. And so this is, so people can go see for themselves what's going on in Xinjiang. If you really want to know, if people really dying to know what's happening in Uyghur in Xinjiang, buy a ticket, go to Xinjiang, see it for yourself, because seeing is believing.
That reminds me of the guy who was flat earther, and they were running free tests, not tests, but they were running free trips to the Antarctica so they could see basically like, dude, if you're right, the sun is not going to do what it's doing here. And every so often you get somebody who the wool fall from their eyes. They're like, oh my God, I was wrong all of these years about there being a flat earth. Well, that is, flat earth thing is kind of the bottom of the barrel to me, but it puts me in mind of something similar where you can go, you can see it for yourself and see what it is. Also, we've lost a huge amount of credibility on this notion of genocide, considering what we're allowing in Israel. How did they go about re-educating it? Because I had the same question for like Nazis, or if we're talking about, let's say, in Afghanistan or some of the Wahhabi schools, how would they go about rehabilitating or re-educating?
So first of all, it is compulsory. They had to go. It was not. They weren't giving a choice. Okay, so that there was compulsory feature of it. But when they go to the de-radicalization camp, they are mostly importantly they're giving job training. And because China, the Chinese government, they function from like the kind of the Marxist understanding of how everything is based on economics, right? So China is the economy, stupid, right?
Yeah.
And so they focus on, they think that it's because the poverty that breeds terrorism and radicalization. So their solution is to give people jobs, to give people training, so they will have jobs, and by economically developing the region, so to remove the soil for radicalization and terrorism. So that's one aspect, and the other aspect is through education, because there was a lot of there were many issues in Xinjiang before. One of the issue was because kind of especially a lot of these jihadist elements were coming back from Afghanistan after the Soviet withdrawal. Some Uyghurs traveled to Pakistan, and then they ended up in all these religious madrasas where they got radicalized, and then they went to Afghanistan to fight the Soviet. And some of these Uyghur Mujahideens came back in the 90s in Xinjiang, where they try to spread their extremist ideology. And so the education part is to counter that, the radicalization part. So it's one part education, one part job training. And this whole de-radicalization program lasted about 1 year or a year and a half time. And so at the end, the people are the government provided them with jobs. The people who were trained in this de-radicalization in camps, when they came out, when they acquired the skill, they were given jobs. And this is where what the U.S. is saying, slave labor. They say, okay, this cannot be voluntary because it's government assigned, so there's state coercion, so there must be slave labor. One of the reasons the government has helped them assign to get jobs is because rather than they have to face the job competition in a free market scenario where people might not be comfortable hiring people who came just straight out of the radicalization program, and this is why the Chinese government was working with the companies, private companies, giving them tax incentive to hire these Uyghurs who came out of the radicalization camps. This is what's labeled as slave labor practice by the U.S. State Department. Again, the sanction serves one goal. The sanction is just like the sanction on Syria. It was designed to collapse the Syrian economy. The sanction on Xinjiang and all the products made in Xinjiang is so those Uyghurs would not have jobs. So they will be stuck in poverty. So there will be discontent. Then there will be rise up and demanding regime change. That's the logic of sanction. But luckily China has large enough internal market, domestic market, that it can absorb all the products produced by Xinjiang without, unlike the case of Syria, where the economy was seriously affected by the Caesars Act.
Well, I'm curious that I had a conversation with someone the other day, and they pointed out that Russia, or for that matter, I would imagine, by extension, China, could have flooded the Syrian market in order to deal with some of the vagaries of the sanctions that were being applied. Do you know if Russia and Syria had any kind of trade relationship, especially with the sanctions being in effect?
Right. I mean, the thing with Russia is they're dealing a problem with their own, which is Ukraine war. And Russia economy itself is under heavy sanction by the West. And Russia, one way Russian economy was sustained is through its normal trading relationship with China, which China kept the relationship as is, despite pressure from United States. United States time again had pressured China to cut off any trading ties with Russia, but China did not comply because China do not want to see Russia fail. Now, however, so Russia do not have the wherewithal to economically sustain Syria because they're more focused in the home front. Whereas China, they have to walk a very delicate balance because the U.S. sanctions, they're not just like sanctioning U.S. companies. It's a global sanction. The logic of U.S. sanction is if you use any kind of U.S. product, if you use U.S. dollars in transaction, then you are liable to be sanctioned because U.S. dollars, that's our property. If you are U.S. dollars, then we can sanction you. And this is why a lot of the Chinese companies, especially private companies, they're a lot more hesitant to invest in places that has U.S. sanction because they might have business, they might have customers in the West, they might have U.S. customers, or they might have customers in Europe or Japan that could be cut off by the U.S. sanctions. So China. I mean, I know people say China could do more, but it's really the U.S. sanction is all encompassing and it's very suffocating. The way it's applied to China, for example, the U.S. sanction is they're not just preventing U.S. companies from selling chips to China, for example. It's also preventing Japanese companies, Korean companies, Taiwanese companies, Dutch companies from selling to China because they say, okay, you guys use U.S. software, you guys use U.S. equipment, then you cannot sell to China. So this is how they the same level of sanction was applied to Syria. I mean, it's like this is why I guess China, in the hindsight, China could do more, but the reason there was not more Chinese investment into Syria is because of the sanctions.
No, I can understand that. I mean, it's amazing to me that the U.S. has that much clout where they can literally intrude into the foreign, or let's say sovereign affairs of nations in regards to who wants to help who, because they're concerned about the sanctions being applied to themselves and their own products and their own thing. And we saw this with the JCPOA. If you remember when Europe was supposed to basically be the guarantors of the deal of the JCPOA. Trump pulls out, and then you get all of these other European companies pulling out because Europe couldn't support the economic output of the U.S.
Remember, at that time, Angela Merkel, Chancellor of Germany, she said, "You know what? Trump has been a bad faith actor. We are going to follow through. Europeans, we are going to follow through. We're going to keep our end of the deal." But all the German executives said, "No, we're out. We're out because we don't want to be sanctioned by United States." Sorry, I mean they are like Angela Merkel don't even have the power to tell the German company what to do because this German executives are so scared of the sanction by U.S. They're like, you know what? We're out. We're going to abide by the U.S. sanctions because we don't want to be sanctioned ourselves.
It's just sovereignty, just completely out the window. Carl, man, thank you for this. Carl, I always enjoy these conversations. I was super curious about how, because I didn't hear much in the news about the relationship between China and Syria. It was always talked about and discussed from the standpoint of Iran, Russia, and Syria, not necessarily China. It's almost like China was behind the scenes in regards to any kind of, anything that was going on. They weren't necessarily in the forefront. So thank you for this. I appreciate it. Carl Zha. He is host of Silk and Steel podcast, focused on China and surrounding regions and their history, culture, and politics. You can follow Carl on Twitter at Carl Zha. You can follow his podcast on Twitter at Steel Silk In, and you can subscribe and support the podcast at patreon.com/Silk and Steel. Man, thank you for this, Carl. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Jamar.
All right, we have come to the end of the show. I would like to thank all of you for joining me in this. Wait a minute, let me get this straight. There we are. I want to thank all of you for joining me. And we have stickers. Is that R okay? Yeah, R okay, I believe that's it. E okay. I'm sorry. My vision. Clearly I'm losing my eyesight. E okay, thank you, man. I really appreciate it. Janice Anderson, if we want Medicare for all, we should be demanding NHS. I think we can do our own version of Medicare for all. Yes, I agree. Like, meaning we need something. I mean, look, the fact that, like, it is hard to understate the significance of a man being shot on camera, like full well standing, aiming, boom, leaving, going to get a Big Mac. And for the response of the American public, it's not horror, it's not shock, it's not anger, it's bravo, bravo. That is a very weird, visceral response. And for whatever moralizing that some of the people want to do within the context of people responding in this way, meaning the way that the elites are horrified by it. Well, they're horrified by it because they have insurance. They have their bills met, their needs covered. And so this visceral anger and understanding of what it's like to have to deal with insurance companies in your time of need. It's not like you're talking to an insurance company when everything is great. Hey, it's a sunny day and I feel great. I'm just calling to check on you. That's not the way we deal with insurance companies. Typically, it's I've broken a bone. I need a surgery. I have this illness or that illness. And you have to deal with the indignity of a company who doesn't know you, don't know your doctor, saying, yeah, we think there's a better solution to this. We think there's a better solution. And again, the reasoning is entirely motivated by the fact that they're compensated for denying you care, meaning they make more by giving you less. That is an outrageous system. And so, yeah, and then there's this other question of, okay, well, what's the solution? What's the political solution to this? There isn't one. There isn't one. I mean, the overwhelming majority, the fact that the American public applauded this shows their point of view towards insurance companies. And yet, there is no political coalition. There is no political party. Joe Biden said even if they pass Medicare for all, he would veto it. So that gives you this idea of, okay, well, there is no political solution to this particular issue. He felt Luigi that this was a political statement. He felt this was what he needed to do to make that statement. So, approve, disapprove. Let's not lose sight of the fact that, yeah, fair enough, it's a human being, and that human being is kids and everything else. But let's also be clear that that human being, just like many other human beings running those companies, have been directly related to people either being in misery or, for that matter, people losing their lives because of their propensity, their search, their reach for profit. So, Janice, thank you for this. In fact, I want to thank all of you for it. I'm going to call this a day. I need to cut videos, and I got to get a bit of work done away from the show. You guys have a phenomenal day. Fault lines. Oh, Jesus Christ, not fault lines. Jamal Thomas Morning Show. Signing off. Old habits die hard. Have a good one, all. Be safe. I'll see you guys probably a little bit later today, and if not today, tomorrow morning. Have a good one, all.